Good evening. It is Monday, March 31st, 2025 at 4 o'clock p.m. and I'd like to call to order the Town of Sutton Select Board meeting and invite you all to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This evening, we typically have our meetings in hybrid format. This evening, this meeting is not going to be in hybrid format. So if you're watching, you can watch it on cable TV like normal, but Zoom participation will not happen tonight. The meeting is being recorded. It will be posted shortly after the completion of the meeting, and it will be available, let's say, tomorrow morning. Close enough? I think we're hearing that from the back. So tonight we have a little bit of a special purpose meeting. If you're here, you're probably aware that sometime in the fall, our town manager, Jim Smith, announced that he's retiring after about 18 years on the job. So according to the charter and the bylaws, a screening committee was formed that has spent the last number of months searching for candidates. So their job was to recommend 3 to 5 candidates, I believe it was, to this board. That process has been completed. Tonight we have 3 candidates that we're going to interview. As part of their process, they hired a firm, Community Paradigm, to assist in that search. We have a couple of members of Community Paradigm here tonight, John Petrin and Julie Jacobson, who are going to help facilitate the interviews tonight. So, John, I don't know if you have anything you would like to add to that? Or?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. So first of all, thank you for working with us on this project. And so this evening, the town received 28 applications. The screening committee narrowed that down to candidates for a screening round interview and then selected 3 to move forward as finalists to the board. So first of all, we want to thank you for the screening committee. We enjoyed working with the 9-member screening committee. They did their job diligently, and we had several meetings with them, I think beginning just before the holidays. And so we worked with them on that. So thank you to Brian Jamrose, who was the chair, of the committee, and the rest of the members of the committee. They worked very well together, as a team. So we have our 3 candidates tonight. The process is that we'll bring in 1 candidate at a time. And you've asked us to ask the questions going through. I just want to make it clear, you have the opportunity to ask follow-up questions, as we go through, whether, if it's a follow-up right there and then, please feel free to do so. This is your interview. We're not making any selection. We're here to facilitate. So feel free to, jump in at any point. And we've set aside 1 hour for each candidate. So we're going to make sure we stick to the 1 hour time frame, basically, for each of the candidates, to be fair. And hopefully we'll get through most of the, questions, but we'll go through. And if a candidate's answered a question, we won't re-ask the question, going through. We'll use our, we'll try to figure that out as we go on. If you feel we're not addressing something, please let us know.
Great.
Going through. But we're ready to proceed unless the board has any questions of us at this point.
Looks like we're good.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So we'll bring in the first contestant this evening. So Austin Cyganiewicz is coming in, and he'll be addressing first.
Hello, everyone.
Austin, welcome.
I'm gonna quickly come shake your hands if that's okay, John.
Yeah, sounds
Sure.
All right, I'll make it quick.
Just don't trip over wires.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Counselor, nice
Thanks
to
for
meet
coming.
you. Nice to see you. Pleasure to meet you. Nice to meet you as well. I think I saw you in the hallway. Good to see you again.
Welcome.
Okay.
Thanks for coming in.
You have a bottle of water in case you need it as we go through the process here. So, Austin, thank you for your interest here in Sutton, and congratulations on being a finalist. Please take a few minutes to tell us about your history and your specific interest in this position, and why do you think you would be successful here?
Great. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. And I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. I also want to, first and foremost, just thank the screening committee for their work and their confidence for putting me and the other candidates forward. That's a tough job, and I appreciate their work. My career started 10 years ago. Can't believe it already. 10 years ago. I was an undergrad at Fitchburg State University, political science. I thought I was going to be an attorney. That didn't work out.
Good choice.
Because I found an interest in an open position on the Board of Selectmen in the town of Winchendon. I ran and I won. And that has ignited a passion for local government that I never expected. And for the past 10 years, I've had the honor to serve as a selectman, a finance committee member, a school committee member, and for the past 6 years in municipal administration, starting as the first director of intergovernmental affairs in the town of Acton, where I really helped that community achieve deeper relationships with our state and federal delegation, which resulted in tremendous funding and other positive impacts for capital projects. Also assisted the community in its already outstanding financial standing by furthering financial transparency tools in our budgeting process. In the past 2 years, I've served as town administrator in the town of Rutland. Town of Rutland, I've significantly accomplished a lot just in the past 2 years. We, like a lot of other communities, have our financial challenges. So what I did was develop a formal budget and capital planning process, something that was never had in the town of Rutland. I also streamlined our personnel and established our personnel functions, also not in existence. And then further, our communications strategy, bridging the information gap between the town and its residents. And my interest in the town of Sutton is really driven by my deep admiration for the work that you've done. I'm very familiar with the work that Jim has done. I had the pleasure of meeting him years ago when I was just starting my career. And I've been following the work that you've done here, and you've done an amazing job. And that's demonstrated also by the long tenure of your town staff, whether it's a manager or your other town staff. You've done tremendous work here. And for me personally, my wife and I are starting a family in 2 months. Kind of scared about that. But I'm looking for stability and longevity in a high-performing organization, and that's the definition of what Sutton is. So as I mentioned, I've been a selectman. 10 years ago, one of my first responsibilities was selecting our next town manager. So I understand your position. I understand you may be anxious about change and what's next. And I appreciate that and respect that. But I want to assure you that Sutton, as you all are familiar with, is a wonderful community that managers strive to work for. And I'm very excited about that opportunity. I'd love to work with you and have the honor to work alongside you and some of the town staff that I see in the back here as well to achieve the goals set forth by the community. And I'm very much looking forward to this discussion.
So with that, how would you work with the board in understanding the vision of the board for the town? And what do you see as your role in that process, as well as setting a path for implementation?
Sure. So one of the first things that typically happens, especially for a new manager, and then this becomes an annual goal, is establishing select board and town administrator goals. That's something that I'm very familiar with. We in Rutland and in my former community, Acton, we establish a board retreat, and we take some time. We bring in some lunch or dinner, breakfast, whatever the time of the day is, and we talk with each of the board members, and we say what's important to you for this upcoming year. And it's also an opportunity for a candid discussion for the administrator or the manager to also share those goals. And what we do is we rank them with the board members, and we establish, usually some short-term, long-term goals that are then set forth and spelled out to boards and commissions. So that's something I'm very familiar with. The other is obviously long-term strategy, right? How do we look at, what are the long-term goals of the community, whether it's looking at your master plan goals or any other, housing production plan, which I know you're working on. We take all that and we typically tie that into our everyday work. So whether it's our budget, so when we're working with town staff, how do we make sure that your budget requests are fulfilling select board goals, or master plan goals, or strategic plan goals? So that's something, I'm very familiar with. I've done that in all of my communities, and we look forward to furthering that here.
So the board's a consensus that leadership skills are critical in this hire. What skills and approach will you bring to the table to address this?
Hey, John. I'm sorry.
We
We have a
some
question here.
Yeah, I do. That's all right?
Oh,
I
yeah,
can
no,
jump in anytime?
absolutely. Just jump in, please. Yep.
How you doing?
Great, how are you?
Good. I have a quick question, and,
Sure.
and it's something that jumped in my head in your opening statements, and again, it has to do with, I guess, relationships with the board. Do you have any personal or professional relationships with any member or members that served on the screening committee?
Personal relationships?
Personal or professional relationships with anyone who's on the screening committee?
I myself do not have a personal relationship with a member of the screening committee. There is a member of the screening committee who is a colleague of my wife. But in terms of a conflict of interest or any, I don't believe that that would be subject to disclosure.
Okay, and what about any other board members in town or any town employees?
Not that I can think of.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
And that was addressed, I will say that was addressed by the member of the screening committee during.
There was a
that
disclosure.
process.
Yep.
So,
Mr. Patron?
yes.
Question? Just a follow-up question. So you might have fact how you set something new in the planning process or financial. My question is to you, is how do they embrace that change? Were there any hesitancy, or how do they embrace that?
So are you talking about sort of long-term planning processes, or?
I'm talking about when you implemented new processes and the like.
So interestingly enough, it's an excellent question, especially in Rutland. A lot of this change was actually identified in the search process when they were recruiting me, saying, we need bylaw reforms, we need personnel policies, we need financial management policies. And the way that we get these policies implemented is we work directly with town staff and the affected boards and commissions. Finance committee, for example, was highly involved in the process. So these policies that were implemented and approved by the select board were a result of community feedback and also the board and commission involvement. And we took a look at best practices. So while Rutland doesn't, Rutland is very unique from a community. There's a lot of ways that we do our budgeting process that doesn't have to be different than what you're doing here in Sutton or what, Worcester's doing, Shrewsbury's doing. So we do a lot of information sharing in municipal government, right? So we took a look at what some other communities are doing that are similar, and we brought that forward and ultimately brought that to the group. And sure, there's probably some policies that, either I disagree with or board members may disagree with, or community members may disagree with. That's government, right? But for the greater good, the board had a candid discussion and approved these. And the good thing about policies, they're always subject to review. I think we have a standing commitment every 2 years to review our policies and make sure they're up to date. They're brand new, so I don't know if we have to update them yet. But surely enough, especially as laws change, we'll also be revising them as well.
So the end game was embracement, right, in the
Yes.
positive sense. Very
Yes.
good. Right,
Yep.
thank you.
Of
Good,
course.
Mr. Patron, please move forward. Thank you.
So back to leadership skills.
Yes, sir.
What skills and approach will you bring to the table to address this?
One of my top skills, I think, is, I do a really good job, in my opinion, of bringing people together, communication, listening. Obviously, communities can have a lot of challenges in terms of differing opinions, right? Again, that's government. But I think what I've been really effective at is bringing in all the stakeholders, identifying what's important to each of them and coming to common ground. Also, I do a lot of research. I spend a lot of time, my wife will yell at me a lot of times for this, watching what other towns are doing, seeing what's working, what's not working. Going to the library, researching town reports, other publications from other communities, and getting information to present that to, whether it's the board, other boards and commissions. So, those I think are two of my top skills that have been successful for me in these relationships.
So let's talk about the Sutton position here. What do you think are the challenges and the opportunities?
So I think in your position statement, you've identified obviously some of the challenges that where I think Sutton is technically classified similar to Rutland as a rural community, right? So we're very limited in some of our commercial or economic development opportunities. I see in Jim's message, I think it's been in his message for Lord knows how many years now, is our limited revenue opportunities, especially for local receipts. A lot of us are going up against it for 2.5 in our local receipts. So that's definitely a pressing challenge for a lot of communities. You saw historic numbers of overrides last year, both successes and failures. So revenue will continue to be a challenging thing for cities and towns. Economic development, infrastructure opportunities, I know is a big challenge here as well. Those are some of the things I think that are top of mind. And then the generic stuff that I think that we're all dealing with. like health insurance, was double-digit increases for us this year. I know it was, I think for you this year too. So there's things like that that I think we deal with every year as a whole from a municipality standpoint that we, I think we'll take some innovative solutions to try to solve.
On that, I got a direct question for you. The current town manager is obviously leaving us in kind of a dire financial situation. As was disclosed in a recent presentation by Fire Chief Matt Balsito, he has requested an evaluation of staffing for the fire department for the last 6 years. However, Mr. Smith stated in a meeting prior in his town manager's update that he's refused to put that forward because essentially he knew what the outcome would be. I mean, anyone who looks at our fire department will know that our on-call members are aging. More than half of our department are 40-plus years old. To make matters worse, as we know, there are significant delays with the procurement of fire equipment, and the department does not have the means to adhere to federally mandated OSHA standards. How would you address this to ensure that the Sutton Fire Department will be able to maintain the highest levels of service to the community if the town votes against an override?
So first and foremost, I support the study that was, I think, proposed. I don't believe it was cut. I didn't see the most updated
Hasn't
capital
happened
plan. I support the advancing the study. I think from a public safety standpoint, I would agree with you that the feasibility study and staffing analysis is probably well overdue here for Sutton. So I support that. And I know that's in at least the draft. I don't know if it's been approved yet. Ultimately it goes to town meeting, right, for the feasibility study. I support that, but also, fire trucks, one, are expensive, and how long is your truck gonna take, Chief?
4 years.
4 years to be delivered. So we just ordered a ladder truck, and it's about the same, about 2.5, 3 years. And, so you can't get these overnight. We have to place an order for an ambulance that will be delivered 5 years from now in Rutland. So an aggressive and well-thought-out capital planning process, especially for apparatus, is very important. I also know, and I heard the discussion among the board, that there's an opportunity, I think, for change when the agreement for EMS services is expired. I think there was a comment, maybe one more extension to do some well-thought-out planning so you can transition staffing. I think that's a reasonable discussion to have and further that even more, but I think that the study should demonstrate that, and I fully support that work. And I look forward to working on that with you folks.
Thank you.
What's the single most important characteristic of an effective town manager?
Single most important, I would say communication at all levels with all stakeholders, residents, board members, staff, board and commission members, state and federal partners. It's a cliche, but it's something that is critical for everything that we do. I'm working on your behalf and on behalf of the community. I need to be able to effectively communicate what I'm working on, what staff's working on, and vice versa. The directives that have been made forth by the board need to be able to communicate that to the community, to town staff. That's something that takes a lot of work. I think I've done a good job of doing that in my communities. And would look forward to developing that even further here as I get to know each of you and members of the community and staff.
Schools are important here in Sutton, and #1 budget, in a community like every single community. What's a good relationship look like between general government and schools?
Well, so I'll be honest, the ability to have a close relationship with the school district is also something that I'm very much looking forward to in Sutton. Town of Rutland, we're a part of Wachusett Regional School District, 5 towns. We're the second largest town in Wachusett. But there is a certain disconnect, I think, as we all know, when you're a part of a regional school system, you don't have the opportunity for that close relationship. Now, I'm very proud that I have developed a very close relationship with the new superintendent and the business manager, business office overall, facilities director as well for Wachusett. But I think a successful relationship is constant communication, probably a weekly either meeting or call with the superintendent or the business manager, and then a commitment to some sort of a quarterly, whether it's the chair of the board and the chair of the school committee meeting for us to coordinate our work. I think that is critical, and you have the ability to do that even more so in a town like Sutton, where you have a public school district that's a part of the town, where we just don't have that opportunity in Rutland. But again, I think the relationship is the best it's ever been in Rutland, because of a variety of things, but I also think that just the active effort by myself and the superintendent has led to a very positive relationship.
Okay, great.
Austin, we're interested in your role in financial planning, in your past positions, your current position, as well as your financial management strategies for ensuring organizational sustainability, as well as stability. So specifically, two-part question here. What have been your responsibilities regarding the preparation of annual town budgets, operating capital, enterprise funds, et cetera? And second part, how would you describe your financial and fiscal philosophy? And give us some examples of an illustration of this philosophy.
Absolutely, great question. So in Rutland, I am the chief financial officer for the community. I'm responsible for development of the budget and capital plan, budget monitoring during the year. I'm responsible for that. We do have a full finance team, but I'm responsible for it. So, I, like many communities, develop a message based upon the select board goals established earlier on in the year. We develop a budget message, transmit that to town departments and boards and commissions, usually September, October, to start the process. We're also asking for capital projects at that time. And then we go through a whole process of receiving, meeting with town departments, and presenting an initial recommended budget to the select board, which then is transmitted to the finance committee. I believe that mirrors very similar to your process. I think town manager's got to submit a budget 90 days ahead of town meeting, 75 to the finance committee. So that's the process that that I follow. I've done a lot of work in improving that process and further developing that process in Rutland, whether it's establishing our very first, believe it or not, our very first budget book in Rutland. There's a lot of information there. I think I shocked our finance committee when they were reading through 100 and some odd pages of a budget book. A lot of information there. Also includes our full capital plan, not with just the recommendations, but also the scoring from, we have a capital improvement planning committee scoring for each of the projects. And then also, just to be transparent, I put in every project that was submitted by town departments, because I want people to be able to see what the needs are for the next 5, 10 years.
I got a question around that,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mitchell. So in developing that capital project, right, do you share that with in detail, right, not just high level, but in detail with the select board as well?
Absolutely. Yep. That's a public document. You could view that right now on the Town of Rutland website.
Okay. As well as reasons for ranking and choosing and,
Yeah, so our Capital Improvement Planning Committee follows, it's actually a Government Finance Officers Association best practice manual for scoring. So it's a, kind of an independent, objective scoring criteria. And so they rank each of the projects, and there's a variety of criteria, maintenance costs, time on the capital plan, candidly. How long has this project been said no to over the past few years? So we follow that process. The scoring is done by the committee and then recommended to me, and then I take the available funding sources and provide a final recommended capital plan.
okay, so it's full transparency from beginning to end.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Absolutely.
Just point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
So you said that all items submitted by the department heads go onto the plan. So you would not sit back and put what you think should be on there?
No, so I put the, so the recommended items show up on the first page. So for example, this year, it's about a $1.3 million capital plan with the funding sources. In the back of the document is all the projects that were submitted for consideration, just to be transparent.
Who ultimately would make the decision what gets submitted to town meeting? Would that be the select board?
So I make the recommendation to the select board, and the select board ultimately makes, because they set the warrant, right? They make the recommendation what is included on the capital plan.
I like that, thank you.
Yeah.
And then just your the philosophy, right? So probably to maybe some of the departments, we only have limited revenue. And, that's one of the challenges is oftentimes you gotta say no to things, whether it's a new staffing request or increasing purchase services line for whatever reason. So in terms of revenue, because we have to be, candidly, DOR doesn't even let us be a little bit more aggressive. Level fund, if not lower than prior year actuals, are local receipts, right? We have to submit substantial documentation for why we believe that we'll receive more revenue. Property tax, is what it is, right? 2.5 plus new growth. We're also very conservative on new growth. We look at, I think we look at actually a 5-year average for our new growth estimates. So very conservative on new growth. Want to give you credit. I know you do that too, which has generated substantial amounts of free cash for you over the years. And then on expenses, because we have limited revenue, again, we're not saying no to a lot of things. So we're having an in-depth conversation in our budget reviews with department heads, looking at your prior year actuals. And if you do have a supplemental request, let's submit that separately so we can have a discussion about that and see if that's something that would be in consideration by the Select Board and Finance Committee. But those are my overall, that's my overall philosophy for the process and what we follow.
Austin, yeah, I know Rutland's kind of facing some difficult financial times, and we're not where Rutland is right now. But I'm wondering how you fill the holes. How do you fill the gaps? Is it are we using free cash? Or stabilization funds? Or how are you doing that?
So my goal is to not use free cash, but I recognize that the word that everyone tries to stay away from is you don't get a lot of those opportunities. That's an override, right? The town, just before I got there 2 years ago, successfully passed a $2 million override. One of the challenges that we have, and I want to give a lot of the credit to the model that I put forward, the town has never had a multi-year financial planning model, ever. And it's never, if they've had one, it's never been published. So I want to be honest with the people about the future, right? Projecting where we are. I went out 5 years, line by line for our budget, and projected out what I think the expenses will be. Now, it's a projection, right? I think I'm pretty close. So I've just been honest with people. What is our projected deficit for this year? What's our projected deficit for the next 5 years? So, the Select Board, what they've decided to pursue for this year is an override to fill our budget gap for this year. No use of free cash to adjust the base, but we are facing substantial increases at the school district level, probably another 7% each year for the next 2 years. That's about a $1.6, $1.7 million increase year over year, just for the Wachusett School District line.
So question, so why that much a year per year for schools? What's the basis for that increase?
So there's a couple of impacts. So Rutland is one of the fastest growing communities in the Wachusett Regional School District. Just to give you an idea, from a land use perspective, we have probably about 150 building permits that are pretty much ready to go. So 150 lots that aren't built yet. So substantial growth. And these aren't just, 1 or 2 bedroom ranches or apartments. These are 3, 4 bedroom colonials, which bring kids into the school system. So our student population is growing tremendously, especially over the past 20 years. That's one. Also, our required local contribution, one factor of the formula is also growing substantially. That increase alone was about $500,000 for us. Now, that's obviously, as you know, that's just the number that the state tells you have to pay. And then Wachusett Regional School District has in their budget, they have what's called a discretionary, or they've changed the names over the past few years, operational assessment. That increase just for that one line item was about $1 million. So taking that into account for us, that's substantial. So when we look at how do we fill the gap, the directive was we either fill it with revenue, whether it's one-time funding sources and override, or we cut. Now, $2 million, to give you an idea, if we take out fixed costs, that's about 25% of our budget. That's a substantial impact in the municipal operation. So, Mr. Bannon, that's where we are right now. There's a couple of proposals out there to try to split the difference, if you will. Maybe you do a smaller override, maybe use a little bit of free cash, and you do have some reductions, mostly to purchase services and supplies accounts. There's no proposed reductions right now for the budget that's on the table for personnel. Obviously, if we continue to see substantial increases without meeting that with revenue, we will continue to have challenges. But that's why I think it's honest. And I just want to give a shout out to, I recognize not everyone has enough paper or opportunities to read through a 100 and some odd page budget book. So a couple storms ago, the winter storm, I was in the sunroom and trying to figure out how to get the word out about this budget. I developed, with the assistance, believe it or not, of ChatGPT, I developed an online budget portal. It's called Rubric, Rutland Unified Budget Review and Information Center. It's a little bit long. I'm working on the name. But on the portal, you can find all of our projected revenues, expenses, reserve positions, capital plan, benchmarks against other communities, so you don't have to go to the DOR website to find all that information. I felt it was important to get that information out there, and also our forecast, so they can see based off of our current spending over the next few years. And that's a tool that the community will be able to utilize in perpetuity as long as they update that every year. So that'll be a substantial tool for the public and our boards and commissions that make these important decisions in the future.
Question.
So I'm proud of that.
I did see that, by the way. I looked at it, I had to, took the liberty of going to your LinkedIn profile, and I did see that, and there were good reviews among that. I'm just curious, how long did it take you to do that? And two, how well received was it? Did you get any accolades from the town folks? Was there usage? Can you monitor the usage from that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna be, it probably took me too long, and again, it was during a snowstorm, and ChatGPT isn't
You probably
always
needed
the best.
three snowstorms.
Yeah, you know, I think, and my wife can attest to this, I disappeared for maybe 2 or 3 days in the sunroom trying to get this done. A lot of trial and error, especially when you're dealing with spreadsheets. It didn't always, read the clearest, but I'm very proud of it. I think it looks okay. It's not the prettiest platform, but it gets the information out there, and that's what I'm proud of. So it took me maybe 20 hours of work over a couple of weeks, the bulk of the first weekend. And then it's been received, very successfully from, folks in town. I think they're very happy to see that as a tool that they can use. And then also, I shared it with some of the folks in my professional network on LinkedIn and on social media, and it's also received some praise there. So I'm very proud of that work, and something I'd love to bring to Sutton as well, to be more transparent here as well.
Were you able to monitor the traffic from that?
Yeah, so I haven't been able to look at the traffic yet. That's one thing that I haven't figured out on websites. So I'm doing all this coding myself with the assistance of GPT, and I'm not a coding expert. But I want to add in the future something like Google Analytics or something, so I can track the usage. But, I know at least a couple of people. You looked at it, so
Yeah.
if it's just you and me, we're keeping it busy. So.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Patron also, thank you.
Austin, just a last follow-up on the financial aspect of it. Can you talk about your experience managing any large capital projects, and also experience in securing alternate forms of financing to
Absolutely.
implement these projects?
Absolutely. So capital projects, that's where things get fun in communities, where, residents can actually see their tax dollars or resources at work. So I've had the opportunity to work on, between Acton and Rutland, several capital projects that were very, important to me, and I'm very proud of. In Acton, we built just about $14 million fire station in North Acton to serve mostly for response times. Was part of the project team, assisted with the development and construction of that project. In Rutland, we have substantial needs for our water and sewer infrastructure, where we have developed a comprehensive water and sewer infrastructure plan, which has resulted in a $5 million capital initiative for our water treatment facility, and also replacing, from an aggressive timeline, all of our AC line pipes in the community for our water and sewer infrastructure. I also mentioned, we bought a ladder truck, so being able to tackle some of the needs for some of our vehicle fleet. This year, we're doing a lot of work on DPW fleet. They've got some really old vehicles, so I'm very proud that we're able to take care of that. And one thing about Rutland is, and I think I heard Mr. Harrison, your finance director, talk about in the past you had some long overdue deferred maintenance work on buildings that you were able to slowly take care of. That's where Rutland is right now. If you look at some of our buildings, the condition of some of our buildings, to give you an idea, we can't even use the upstairs in Town Hall, which I think is a shame. So we're doing a lot of catch-up work on deferred maintenance around all of our municipal properties, including our school facilities, whether it's ADA compliance, life safety, code compliance. We're doing a lot of work there across all buildings. And for outside funding sources, that was pretty much my main job when I was in Acton, was developing those relationships with our state and federal partners, which I was very successful in doing that, whether it's our in Acton, Congresswoman Lori Trahan's office had monthly calls with their constituent services director there. And then I have regular meetings with our state senator and state rep in Rutland. And those relationships have resulted in significant investment from outside agencies. So in Acton, about $5 million in MassWorks grants for infrastructure improvements for economic development projects, achieved a $750,000 historic preservation project from a federal earmark when they used to do those a couple of years ago at the federal level. And then also, we are a green community, and we've been very successful in advancing green communities projects and initiatives, several $100,000 in green communities projects. So, I think especially when I just got an email from our district director for our state senator's office. It's about that time to start submitting projects. So you submit your list, your top 3, and they try to find ways to get those, whether it's in a budget earmark or a bond bill. Been very successful. There's several other projects I can mention, but that's definitely something I take care of. And we apply for virtually every grant that's out there, especially the past few years. I was just at an event for CMRPC. I ran into Matt Stencil. Saw his really cool F-150 Lightning out in the parking lot. Talked to him a little bit about that. But CMRPC and some of the other agencies around here have done a really good job of promoting grant opportunities. So I will go to every workshop that's available to learn about grants, and we'll apply for everything. We'll try to be competitive. CMRPC is very helpful, but if we can't use their assistance, we'll apply independently. Most of them are competitive, and sometimes we're not as competitive for our applications, but the agencies do not know our needs if we don't put in and submit something on behalf of the community. So,
Did you require any debt exclusions for like the fire truck or anything?
we did exclude the fire truck.
Yeah.
I think that'll be a 10-year borrowing.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question around, in small towns, obviously, there's limited resources and limited revenue sources, and it's kind of a shell game to kind of deal with the, each issues that have come up. And one of the challenges we're facing here in Sutton is trees falling, keeping the maintenance up on those. The roads are kind of a mess in a lot of places, especially right now, especially with the frost season kind of just coming to an end. How would you kind of deal with that shell game of trying to deal with, there's so many things competing for our resources, but that's something that seems to always kind of slip to the end of the list. And so how would you deal with managing that against all the other priorities? Because it is an important quality of life issue and also a danger issue. We've had some incidents in towns with trees, injuring people and actually killing a dog and things like that. So how would you kind of manage that?
So that's an interesting question. So we have a gentleman who's helping us out with some work in the backyard. He's from Sutton, and I asked him that very question: what's the most important thing? And he said that, trees and roads, which was kind of interesting. Obviously, I heard a little bit about that discussion in your capital planning discussion. There's a supplemental addition of additional work for the highway department to do some tree work. I believe that's still included in your capital plan. So, first and foremost, the ability to have resources to be able to address those is critical. Oftentimes, a lot of us communities, we don't have a certified arborist on staff. So you end up contracting it out. You pay more for contractors to do that work, and they're also limited in their capacity. So, it would be great if we had someone in-house to be able to do that, but obviously recognizing that that's not always the case in communities. So I think it's great that you're advancing funding to be able to do that work. Also on the funding perspective, right now the proposed Chapter 90 bond bill has substantial investments in Chapter 90 funds for communities. For Rutland, our normal allotment is about $300,000. If this Chapter 90 bill passes, it's about $700,000 a year, doubling our Chapter 90 allotment. We can get a lot of work done with resources. Now, to your question about prioritization. So I'm not aware if you have it here, but a lot of communities are doing, pavement condition indexes, essentially rating all of your roads. I looked around, maybe I didn't look hard enough. I don't know if you have one here. So that's one way that you can try to get the most critical roads done first. Obviously, the longer you wait, the condition gets worse and usually the cost gets higher. So trying to utilize systems like that. There's also some very just innovative solutions that you can do to try to at least preserve roadways for as long as possible, whether it's crack sealing, chip sealing for some of your other maybe dirt roads or gravel roads. So there's resources like that you can try to take advantage of to preserve those resources. And, you know, it'll be the same thing, I would say, for some of the tree work that needs to be done. I'm sure the highway department and some of you folks, you have your lists, and as long as you have the resources, you try to take advantage of as much as possible in that fiscal year. So, you know, that's, I think, the, you know, kind of the best practice for taking care of that kind of infrastructure. But, you know, we all know, obviously, even with this substantial Chapter 90 stimulus, it's still not enough, right? Even if we got everything we needed in 1 year, it would take so long. By the time we got done the work, we'd have to restart the whole list over again. So, also, you know, and that's, I think, part of sometimes the methodology for some of those PCI reports is, you know, what's most traveled, you know, what's the traffic, and how do you mitigate that as much as possible. But, you know, those are just some of the things that I've seen communities in Rutland we do as well.
All right, thank you.
Related to personnel management, what are some of the key human resource issues and needs that you'd want to address if you got this position?
Yeah, so, you know, I think if you're in municipal government, obviously you don't get into municipal government to be the highest paid person in your profession, right? So I recognize that that's a challenge that, you know, a lot of cities and towns have from a staffing standpoint is, you know, if you compare to the private marketplace, especially in municipal finance, for example, you know, the positions, you know, do not pay as much, right? So I don't think any of us will be able to, you know, to bridge that gap. But, you know, one of the things that I think that municipalities have historically done well on is, you know, some of our benefits and, you know, additional benefits, I'll say. You know, whether it's flex scheduling, hybrid work schedules, things like that, that municipalities, I think, are starting to embrace a little bit more. So I take a look at some of the policies that we have here and see if there's any ways that we can try to, you know, make for a better workplace for the employer, but also the employees as well. And, you know, some of the opportunities to try to see what morale looks like right now. Again, I mentioned probably the anxiousness that everyone's feeling, not just you folks, but town staff. I know in the position statement, you mentioned a couple of possible senior staffers that may be retiring. So there's probably a lot of anxiety about change here. So I want to get an idea about what the organization looks like from a personnel perspective and see if there's ways that we can, you know, do a little bit of succession planning so we can ease that, you know, anxiety a little bit as we're working to, you know, to get to the next workforce. But also, you know, there's little things that help to try to improve morale, right? You know, whether it's a holiday luncheon, which I know you folks do as well, you know, a spring barbecue, professional development opportunities to further develop folks and recognize their strengths. And that, you know, one thing that it's small, it costed me, you know, a couple $100 to get the award. I created an Employee of the Year award in Rutland, nominated by their peers. It was an opportunity to recognize 2 employees per year from public safety and from general government, and recognize their impacts. And it was, you know, it was a 20-minute meeting for us. We got some, you know, light refreshments, and it was a way to bring everyone together and recognize 2 employees. And I think that made a really good impact. You know, so that's kind of my style. You know, dealing with folks, whether it's staff, board members, members of the public. You know, very much an open door policy. No appointment is ever needed. Call me, text me, email me. Just pop in. Be happy to meet with you. I'm always accessible there, which I think is important from this position as well. Is to make sure that people understand you, who you are, what's important to you, and you can have an open dialogue about, you know, what is, you know, working or not working for your department or the organization overall.
And I have one question in that area. And of course, I appreciate your answer, which was, of course, the half glass full response.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to have a question that goes to the half glass empty. As I'm sure you know, a ranking officer in the police department has filed a lawsuit against the town, 3 members of this board, 2 members of the police department, and the Sergeant and Patrolmen's Association, due to the fact that the majority of this board deemed the officer unfit for a promotion. Speaking only for myself, I was forced to vote against the officer's promotion for police chief primarily due to the union tendering a unanimous vote of no confidence. Now, many of the issues surrounding that vote of no confidence were present for many years, but they were largely ignored and allowed to fester due to the failure of an implementation of coherent and concrete HR standards and policies town-wide, similar to what you would find as best practices in the public or the private sector. You mentioned in your opening statement that you would seek to streamline personnel policies. Well, how would you work with the HR director to address situations like this to ensure that best practices are adopted and in order to avoid similar circumstances from occurring again?
Excellent question, and thank you for that. A lot of communities are facing similar challenges to what you just mentioned as well. So, that was, front of mind in Rutland. We had nothing on the books. Well, we had one employee acknowledgement which said draft at the top. Acknowledging nothing because we didn't have a handbook, right? So really took a lot of time and effort to develop a comprehensive set of personnel policies. And at the time, we didn't have an HR director, so a lot of it was done by myself or working very closely with department heads to try to get some of the work done and see what worked. So we went policy by policy. Again, did a lot of work in looking at what other communities had for personnel policies and see, does it work for Rutland? I do the same thing here. Does it work for Sutton? And took a look at best practices. Also, my position in Rutland, I'm a member of the Human Resources Association for Massachusetts, and also utilized their resources that they had for policies and best practices. And ultimately, it took a long time. It took a little bit longer than I wanted, to be honest. But I think we did it right, and we implemented personnel policies that were negotiated with our unions and negotiated with all of our department heads and town staff and accepted by all of them and ultimately accepted by the select board. So, it was a lengthy process that took a lot of time. Very much would look forward to working with your HR director to do that work as well. But, again, not abnormal, unfortunately. And it's often news articles that end up, stressing the need for these policies, unfortunately. But I think it's important, again, not just to, very similar to our planning documents, the worst thing you can do is take personnel policies, put it in my resume that I accomplished it, and then put it on a shelf and never follow it, right? So we're also very similar to our bylaws and our policies, constantly reviewing them. There's been several laws that have changed since we implemented those policies that we're going to have to update as well. So, and being a member of those associations also kind of helps us, make sure that we're to industry standards to make sure that we're in line. And then also, you mentioned, and I don't know if this is a question, but, sometimes things don't always go well. And that's normal in organizations. And that's happened in Rutland, unfortunately. Not everything has been perfect in Rutland. I've had to, take actions following a progressive discipline model leading up to and including termination for employees for violation of town policies or poor performance. Obviously, that's not the desired path, but now that we have policies to follow to be able to do that, that also reinforces our ability to manage the organization effectively from a best practice standpoint.
And you're confident enough in yourself to do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the answer. I appreciate it.
The related topic, as you implemented those policies, did you have to deal with, talk about dealing with the unions to get that done?
Yeah, so I jumped in. First day, I actually had to start negotiations with dispatch. First day, I don't even think I signed the employee acknowledgement form yet. I have successfully negotiated a contract with all but one of our union, and the one that I haven't, just not expired yet. We haven't started that process yet. So both of our police, patrol and superiors union, firefighters union, dispatch, and then we actually had a newly formed clerical union and negotiated that very first agreement. So, very comfortable and familiar with the collective bargaining process. I'm happy to say we've not gone to arbitration or JLMC at all because I believe in good labor relations with our employees, right? Collective bargaining isn't just when our contract's about to expire, it's year-round. Whether it's dealing with policy changes that need to be bargained, or dealing with, in the case of budget decisions, if there's any potential reduction in the level of services that would impact unions. So, it's just honest communication and transparency right up front about, what my goals are as a manager, working with department heads with respective unions, what are their needs from a management rights perspective. And then usually those conversations end up being our initial proposals during the collective bargaining process. There's no need to play games, right? We're going to be upfront, have an honest conversation about, what our needs are, what your needs are, and how do we come to a successful compromise. Again, doesn't always happen, right? But I'm very comfortable in my ability to work with town staff and management and select board to achieve good labor relations and cost effective and responsible CBAs for employees or for the municipal government. I'll give you one example. I don't want to take too long on this. Our CBAs typically, like most, have a maybe 1-2% COLA, but our wage scale in between steps was 4.5%. So 2% plus 4.5%, that's a substantial increase. You talk about, how do we manage costs? We got to get some of our wage growth down a little bit. So we successfully negotiated two things: reducing the percent in between steps. So we're still going to give a 1-2% COLA, reduce the percent in between steps to 1.5%. And one thing that I was actually surprised it was agreed upon by our firefighters and our newly formed clerical union, to get that step, you need to have a successful performance review by your superior. That's unheard of, especially in unions, but we did it. And I'm very proud of it. And it was actually feedback that I received one-on-one from employees. It's not fair that I'm doing all the work and this guy's still getting the same raise as me. So we introduced performance reviews. And the fire department just completed their very first round of performance reviews. And I'm very proud that's in there, was accepted by the select board, and accepted by one of our big unions, our firefighters union. I think that's a good leadership to some of our other unions as well.
So with that said, there's no, everybody was saying to be on board with that for
Yeah.
that performance
Yep,
review.
it was ratified by the union and obviously the select board as well.
Right, very good, thank you.
And we also have that for our non-union staff as well. So currently, the only ones that don't have it are dispatch, police, and DPW.
So if I can extrapolate that question, so would it be like those regular officers, but as well as for those reporting to the chief, like the lieutenants, will they also have performance reviews as well? Is it full boat?
So, Chief, I don't know if you can help me. Are your superiors like lieutenant in the union?
No.
No. So if they fall under the non-union policies, for example, in Rutland,
Yeah.
we do have that in our non-union policies. So, for example, the police lieutenant would be included in that performance review standard.
Very good, right, thank you. Thank you, Susan.
So in the interest of time, we have about 15 minutes left. So
Be
I'm going to
quick.
skip a couple questions, so forgive me if I'm not following the exact order, but want to dive into a little bit on communications, because you talked about how that's the one characteristic that you think is really critical, as does the board. How would you increase communications externally, internally, whether it's the use of technology or other new communication methods? And then the second part, I always have the two-part question, right? Second part to that question is, how would you develop relationships with the citizens and become immersed into the community?
Excellent question. I'm going to start with communications, internal first. So, one of the ways that I communicate internally, I'll start with town staff, is, holding, monthly department head meetings. We just had one last week to give you an update on the budget process, and other, things that are going on. It's an opportunity to get everyone together. Sometimes we'll bring in, some breakfast to kind of break the bread, if you will, and talk about town issues. And then also, I strongly believe I hate sitting in the corner office all day. So I'll get out and I'll meet with town staff and department heads. I like to go where they are to make them comfortable, or go to offsite lunch meetings. We do a bi-weekly public safety lunch with the chiefs and our dispatch director. It's a way to kind of get those updates and communicate internally there. Also, as I mentioned earlier, anytime there's a decision that impacts town staff by the select board, we'll communicate that usually by email. We have a department head email shell. We'll communicate that to department heads. Let me know if you have any questions. And then on updates to select board, I do actually have a select board meeting tonight, so I gotta buzz back. I do a report to my select board meeting, written report published on the town website. And then also, in the off weeks, if there's things that come up, you will get a lot of emails from me about updates, whether it's a couple of bullet points. But I also believe that, not everyone's great at email. So I also want to have a conversation with you about what your preferred communication style is. Do you like phone calls, text messages? Do you want to meet with me bi-weekly? Or if you're fine with the emails, just let me know, and I'll adapt my communication style to that. I mentioned the open door policy. It's very important. Quite literally, now there's one door to my office. It's wide open all day. If you come in and have a question, happy to take a few moments and chat with you. And then for external communications, I fully embrace any technology that's available. You know, we do a lot of social media. We did a complete rebranding of our website, which I know that you're working on your capital plan, updating your website to the new Civic Plus platform. Something that I did as well through a grant opportunity, actually, to update the town website. So we use social media, and town website has a newsflash function. We will send communications of all kinds, whether it's the warrants now open, budget updates, water main leak. We'll send all that through our website and social media. We also use, as necessary, you know, kind of the one call through, I think it's the application's Rave, so we'll be able to target communications to certain neighborhoods if there's a water main break, for example. We do use that. And then I you know, fully embrace and appreciate the opportunity to get out. So, you know, I do a monthly coffee talk at the senior center. Just had one the other day. There was actually a lot of people there. It was really interesting. Great way to connect with folks at the senior center. And then, you know, my wife and I, we attend everything. Rutland's known for their 4th of July celebration. We'll go to that. They have a, believe it or not, fireworks during Christmas time, Festival of Trees. We'll go to that. Friday, summer concert series. It's a great way for us to get out together, but also for us to connect with the community, and I would, you know, fully embrace it and love to do that as well. And then, you know, a lot of times, lunchtime, I'll go for a walk. And whether I run into staff members or I run into members of the community at the coffee shop or wherever, it's an opportunity to connect with them as well. So that's kind of my, you know, main
I
communication
have
style is
one
getting
quick
out.
question
Yes,
in
sir.
terms of the outward reach, in terms of communication to the community. Do you have implemented in Rutland social media policies that basically dictate who is allowed to utilize town Facebook pages, social media networks, and, you know, kind of like best practices for that?
We do, yeah, and that was actually a part of the grant that we got, was actually developing a, you know, communications protocol and strategy for town departments. We haven't had any issues with use of social media and communications. It's been actually a great resource to get information out there to the community. But we do have that policy, which we require all town staff to sign off on.
And is it
acknowledge.
departmental communications, or is it just town-wide? So do you have one thing that comes
It's
from the
both.
town, or you
Yeah.
allow the departments to communicate independently?
So we do allow departments to communicate, fully recognize that I'm not a subject matter expert for, fire department operations or DPW notices, things like that. So, we do empower them to put out communications, but obviously if there's an issue with the communication or, it's in violation of policy, I'll have that discussion with the department head. But we do kind of set expectations. One of the best things is, and actually I think you folks do it here as well, is give a department a template. Easy enough, give them a template about, how to post something, and usually they do a pretty good job with following it. And if there's ever questions or issues, again, we'll have, that one-on-one conversation with them.
Thank you.
Quick question. So in developing the agenda for the select board meetings, are you engaged with the chairman? Does the chairman set the agenda, or you, or is it collaboratively?
It's collaborative. Yep. So, typically, I'll assist with the
For
first
each
draft.
meeting, it's collaborative.
I'm sorry?
For each meeting, it's
Yes,
collaborative. Very
that's
good.
correct. I'll, kind of set the first draft, recognizing that there's, whether it's directives from prior board meetings, hey, we want to put this on the next agenda, or we want to address this in April, we'll have a running list of things that need to be addressed. And then, we'll forward that through email to the chairperson, see if there's any comments, things that they want to move around, add, delete. And then we'll publish that usually on the Wednesday or Thursday before the meeting.
Do you
Very
publish the documents that the select board sees to the public before the meeting?
We
or-
do.
yeah.
Yep, we publish it's actually on at the same time as the agenda. So as soon as the agenda is published, the packet is also available online. Not just for the select board, but for the public. So you can go right on our select board page and see everything. And we do that as well for most of our other board and commissions. I think FinCom, Planning Board, Conservation Commission. So a lot of our, especially kind of the important ones, regulatory boards, land use boards, their packet is also available too.
Thank you.
So we're down to 5 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
So I just want to make sure you're all set with things, from your question viewpoint. So is there anything?
I just have a question on economic development.
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, economic development is an issue and growth in every town. People move to Sutton because they kind of like the open space and the small town feel, and and obviously for a town to continue to be able to have revenue and increase funds and all that, we need to grow. So there's that tension, and also people really take to heart our, like our open farmland and our historic assets. And so how do you kind of manage that kind of tension between, having to, grow particularly, in the commercial space, but also kind of manage the reason why we all came here, right? Which is like many people come here is because they like that small town feel and not want to grow too quickly. So how would you handle that?
So first of all, I want to give a lot of credit to all the work that you've done, especially on, one of the things that I can really appreciate of the time that I've spent here in Sutton is you've done an amazing job, especially preserving your farmlands. You have a beautiful community, especially once you get off of 146, you almost disappear. It doesn't feel like you're in Sutton anymore. I think most of us are familiar with the 146 corridor, right? And you've got Unified, you've got Market 32. It seems like a busy and developed town, and then you disappear into the farms and the woods out here. So I really appreciate the work that you've done, whether it's through zoning, or just overall, minimum lot size, things like that you've demonstrated to the community. But again, just kudos to your preservation of farmlands. Rutland has the same problem and challenge, right? We haven't done a good job. Most of our farms are now several hundred houses. We've lost a lot of our farms. But I think that that's also an asset for you from an economic development opportunity. You have tremendous natural resources that you can promote from an economic development perspective. So tourism, how many people, will come here, to play golf or to go walk on the farmlands or go to, Waters Farm, for example. How many people come here for those assets? And then when you bring people here, you have economic and business development opportunities. But I also would, double down on the strategy you have for the commercially developable lands that you have in town. So you do have adequate zoning, for example, in some of your village centers, whether it's Manchog or Wilkinsville or, kind of the 146 corridor as well. But then also, obviously we're all looking at what are our 40B requirements. You as an MBTA community, how do you end up complying with that law, which is obviously we're all still waiting on seeing what the results of that are long term, right? So I want to support the work of the Housing Production Plan, the committee that you're on, Mr. Choppany?
You can call me Mrs. C, that's
Okay,
fine.
Mr. C. There's a lot of work there. So how do you tie, some of those needs that are in those plans to your economic and community development needs? It's a challenging thing, though, right? I think we can take advantage of some historic opportunities, like in Manchog, for example. I know there was discussion about the cemetery facility. There's been talk about maybe you put a restaurant down there. You take advantage of that and kind of develop a brand for the different villages, if you will, from an economic development perspective. But I fully embrace and believe that you can get the kind of business you want if you are very intentional about that. But you're also intentional about what you don't want. Like Rutland is very clear that they do not want a big box store. So we're not going for a big box store. They want a coffee shop, they want a barber shop, they want a bakery. So we're reaching out to prospective businesses to attract those. And we won't always be successful because there's other challenges like infrastructure. How do we tie in and how do we attract, whether it's through a MassWorks grant, how do we bring in a business like what you did with the gas line, right? With a MassWorks grant. How can we tie in opportunities through external funding sources as well? So
In Rutland, do you have 40R? Are you considering 40R? Okay.
is that smart growth?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, very good.
No.
Just a question.
We probably would have benefited from it if we did years ago, but no, they did not. We are applying smart growth principles, but not, we haven't designated a smart growth area, for example.
Okay, because a lot of times that smart growth, 40R, if you're looking at it, the increase of schools.
You get revenue.
Exactly, for
Yeah.
schools, yeah. So it defaults to 40S, so it's something to consider. Yeah.
All right, so we are at our time.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'd like to offer Austin the opportunity for a closing statement to the board.
Thank you.
Well, I just, want to thank you again for taking the time and your deep, respect and appreciation for this process. I've been watching a lot of your meetings, and you've had a lot of very candid discussions about this process and, what you want for your next town manager. I believe I have a lot of the skills and experience that match what you're looking for. It would be an honor to work with each of you to get some of the work done. This is a wonderful community. You've done a lot of excellent things, and it would be a pleasure to work with you, and I appreciate you taking the time.
So Austin, as you know, the board will be meeting Wednesday night for the discussion, on the process, and you'll be hearing from Julie and myself, as to the results of that.
Excellent.
Okay, so thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Appreciate your time coming out.
I'm going to borrow a town report if that's okay.
Sounds good. Austin, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Austin.
Okay. So we have 5 to 10 minutes, if Paul wants to take a little break here. And our next candidate is here, but we can get going as soon as you're ready.
Thank you.
Pretty good.
So I just said I.
Okay, great. So we have our second candidate here this evening, John Woodsmall. So, John, thank you for coming out and your interest here in Sutton, and congratulations on being a finalist. Why don't you take a few minutes to tell us about your history and your specific interests in this position? Why would you be successful here?
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having me. I apologize in advance. Had a cold last week, and my voice is still a little affected by that, so bear with me. So, a little bit about myself. I've been the Public Works Director for the town of Holden since 2011. Before that, I worked for the town of Southborough as their town engineer, and previously worked in the engineering division of Concord Public Works. And going way back, I was a engineer for Weston and Sampson Engineers when I first got out of WPI. I'm interested in this position as I feel this is the next step in my career. I've been doing public works now for 20 years, working in municipalities for over 20 years. I will be I profess I'm a little bit of a municipal nerd. I've used that term before, but I am interested in how town government works, how it works for the people, and what it can do for the community as a whole. I've been involved with things in my own town, where I live in Clinton, and have been strongly involved in everything that happens in Holden. As the Public Works Director, Public Works is a large customer service agency, and we support not just the people on the roads and the buildings, but we support the other town departments. And I need to know at a basic level how those town departments work. And, doing this job for long enough, I've interacted with the town clerk's office and know their election schedule and the things that they need to do. Deal with assessors in terms of creating assessors maps and the information they need to help set the tax rate. I deal with procurement all the time. I just recently resubmitted my certification for the Mass Certified Public Procurement Officer. Work with police and fire departments on a regular basis to determine, both in terms of what they need in their buildings, but also, things that affect them operation, we need to know so that we can help support them. We deal with the recreation department, and with the town manager's office. I'm always in there talking with him, strategizing over a big projects, small projects, dealing with the public on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's, and what interested me in this position is the town has obviously had a long history of good, steady management with the previous, the current town manager. And, I think that's a good sign for any municipal employee coming in. It's a competitive environment out there, and, it's an attractive place, I think, for my next step.
So how would you work with the board in understanding the vision of the board for the town? And what do you see as your role in that process, as well as setting a path for its implementation?
It sounds simple, but it just comes down to communication and being able to understand where the board as a whole and, honestly, what individual members, where they want to go towards. Ultimately, I will report to the majority of the board, but really I report to the whole board. It involves getting to know personalities, getting to know interests, and where people are coming from in terms of their backgrounds. And it involves me communicating those same things. A lot of it is going to involve me taking feedback from the department heads and bringing things forward to you folks as to what can be done differently, or projects that they see coming, issues that they see coming, and basically keeping a free flow of information back and forth, and because that's just critical. When people operate in the dark, they end up feeling unsupported. They end up going in directions that perhaps they shouldn't, that perhaps the board doesn't want them to go in. And so it's critical to really make sure everybody's on the same page and going forward. And whether that's, news that they want to hear or news that they don't want to hear. It's not just about telling good news. It's about you need to give the bad news as things happen as well and make sure everybody is aware of that.
All right, if I may, I just want to be consistent because I did ask Austin the question. I just want to maintain that I asked the same questions in the same place. So, at this time, do you have any personal or professional relationships with any member or members that were on the screening committee?
No,
Do you know or have any personal or professional relationships with anyone that's on this board, any other town board, or currently work for the town of Sutton?
nothing I'm aware of.
Great, thank you, sir.
So the board is in consensus that leadership skills are critical in this hire. What skills and approach will you bring to the table to address this?
So, this sounds a little self-serving, but I consider myself a good, strong leader. That's easy for me to say. I think the results, the proof is in the pudding, and what my department has been able to do, what people who have worked for me have been able to do and improve on and go on towards. I think a large part of that is dealing with being a mentor, understanding what people want for their careers, what they need for information, tools, the things that interest them. And, I've been able to, there's probably over the past 10 years, roughly half dozen, maybe a little bit more of my folks that have hired or groomed have moved on to public work directors, superintendent positions, town engineer positions. It's a little bit of a building of a network. It's been neat to see that happen. The leadership, it just, again, it comes down to communication, understanding the people's, what people want, what's motivating them, and a lot of it is just coming down to, one-on-one communication with people and setting aside time to drive around with the department head or come into their building and sit down with them in their office and chat for an hour or so. It's just simply sitting in an office up here in Town Hall. You will never learn what your organization is or how it works or what's driving the people to succeed. And you have to get out there and talk to them and find out.
Question? Mike, thank you. Thank you. You mentioned that this is your next step, in a sense, right? So with that said, working with Select Board, how many Select Board meetings have you attended in the past year in the town of Holden, you would say?
I was thinking about this. This has actually been a very quiet year. And probably three. I would say usually it's anywhere from 6 to 8. It depends on if we have rate increases being planned for the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund, because not only do I present that to the Finance Committee, I'll also, as the Water Sewer Commissioners, the Board of Selectmen has to make any decisions on rates. So I would be there for that. I was actually at the Board of Selectmen's meeting just this past last Monday due to a broadband company coming into town, installing high-speed fiber, and they were coming in to introduce themselves, and knowing that they were going to have, the select board would have questions about, how that construction process is going to work. Myself and the town engineer were there. But long way of saying, I regularly attend select board meetings and done presentations at select board meetings, town meetings, finance committees. Actually, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but I was very impressed with the way that the Finance Committee was holding their most recent meeting, because our Finance Committee, it took me about 3.5 hours over 2 weeks to get through my presentation, and the Finance Committee got through 3 significant departments very quickly, so.
But meetings like, for instance, you had meetings where you had to do for your own position, right? But outside of that, just for observation, with just watching or attending the select board meetings?
At work, in Holden?
In general?
In general. I will, on occasion, watch them. I do pay attention to my own local selectmen. And I have watched some of the meetings here. So it's not necessarily the most exciting things. I usually do it on my laptop and with my headphones on so my family doesn't yell at me, but it does happen.
Very good. Thank you.
So let's just talk about, Holden's a little bigger community than Sutton. What's your department look like? What's your budget? How many people? And what's the scope of your responsibility?
Thank you. My department is, we have a total of 34 full-time personnel across 6 different divisions. That's administration, engineering, highway, buildings and grounds, water and sewer, and mechanics, fleet maintenance. My general fund budget is right around $3 million a year. My water and sewer enterprise fund budget is right around $9 million this year. And then on top of that, between the 2 funds, anywhere between 1 to 2, possibly in busy years, $3 to $4 million worth of capital projects or purchases each year. We maintain 121 center line miles of roads, about 105 miles of water, around 80 miles of sewer with about 31 sewer pump stations, 8 to 10 municipal buildings, several of them being historic. And so I have really 3 people that my direct reports in terms of the town engineer, the highway, the water and sewer superintendent, and the supervisor of operation who handles highway, buildings and grounds, and mechanics. And there's foreman for each of the 4 operations divisions. Part of managing that on a day-to-day is, again, getting out of my office, walking the mechanics floor, walking the garage, driving around, stopping on construction sites, stopping in the buildings that we're working on, and not just hiding behind a desk in front of my screen.
Are you involved in any budget forecasting?
Yes.
All right. Go ahead.
So with the water and sewer, so on the general fund things, there are more other people involved, and obviously a lot more departments that have to come into effect to create that annual budget. So I do my general fund budget and whatnot. On the water sewer enterprise fund, that's pretty much my baby, and I have to come up with both the expenses, the revenues, create the recommended rate changes, and then I do a 5-year forecasting plan for the water and sewer enterprise fund as a 5-year budget plan, looking at planned regular increases in expenses, possible larger capital programs coming down, and then looking at what's going on with our rates as they come in and what would have to be done to increase revenues or decrease expenditures to keep things on a level playing field.
In any of your professional experiences, have you ever built up a department from scratch?
Not particularly. I would say that when I started in Holden, it was a little odd. The department had always been one joint department, but it acted in their own columns, in their own silos. And one of my first things was realizing that we're not going to be all as effective if we're not working together and as the same team. And my first year or 2 was really breaking down those barriers and making people understand, and I did this at the last interview, but when we're wearing our uniforms and we have the town seal on it, people don't care that you're the highway division in the public works. They don't care that you're water and sewer. They just know you're town of Holden DPW, and if something needs to be done, you need to take care of it. And there was a lot of breaking down those barriers. Some people get upset. Some people were very happy. I think it in some ways I had to bring it down to the foundation and then build it back up together, and I think we've done that quite successfully.
Okay, the reason why I asked is the current town manager is leaving us in a dire financial situation. As was disclosed in a recent presentation by Fire Chief Matt Belcito, the chief has requested an evaluation of staffing for the SFD for the last 6 years. However, as Mr. Smith stated in a meeting prior during his town manager's update, that he has refused to do so previously prior to this year because he knew what the outcome would be. Anyone who looks at our department will see that our on-call members are aging, with more than half being 40 years or older. To make matters worse, there is a significant delay, as I'm sure you know, in the procurement of fire equipment, and the department does not have the means to adhere to federally mandated OSHA standards. How would you address this to ensure that the Sutton Fire Department will be able to maintain the highest levels of service to our community?
So first off, I think the community needs to make a decision. Is that what they want? And I think most people will say yes. And then you have to show them the facts of what needs to be done. A small, full-time department with a large complement of on-call firefighters is unfortunately going away. And Holden, when I came in, they had about 4 to 5 years before I started, had started to make that transition. It's difficult and it's expensive. One thing that Holden was able to do over the past 10 years is take advantage of the federal SAFER grants for phasing in new fire personnel over a series of 3 years. Generally, I think it's a declining reimbursement or declining reimbursement of personnel. I don't know if it's 70% the first year and 50 the next and 30 the. So that's one way of being able to bring in new positions if you get that grant, and slowly wean yourself off of, wean yourself onto more of a full-time complement. At the same time, the call people, they shouldn't see, I would hope that it's never seen as being a negative that the department is going more towards a full-time position. Because you can see I've seen it a little bit on the periphery. There can be tension between the people who come in as the full-time and the people who are doing this, part-time on a call basis. You need to make sure that, again, it comes to being on a team. And just because somebody is a full-time person doesn't mean, certainly they're an equal of anybody else who is going through the training, attending regular education sessions, keeping up their certifications as a call person. That's difficult, and that gets back to the leadership of the chief and the basically a statement of the town that they're going to accept the fact that if they want to be able to pick up the phone and have a fire response within NFPA standards, this is what's necessary. And otherwise, you're not going to have that.
I could just go one quick follow-up question. You mentioned the 3-year grant to start increasing headcount. Would you encourage the fire department to pursue those and then be willing to support it after the grant period ends?
Yes. If I was in that position, I've seen it used successfully where I am employed now. It was used as a base to move forward. I understand it's a competitive process, and there's no guarantee that you would be able to get it. One of the big discussion points that revolved around that when it came into Holden was there's a little bit of this, yes, we're going to do this, but there's no guarantee that, once the money runs out that you're going to be employed. And I can see that. I've seen advertisements on MMA and things like that where it's like non-SAFER grant funded, where people are, I can see as a new applicant that I want to make sure that this position is going to be funded in 3 years. To me, that as part of building a team and being a leader, I would have to say to the board, to the finance committee, to town meeting, don't approve this if you don't want to keep these people, because you're wasting people's lives. People are making choices, making decisions about where they want to work, and if you're going to pull the rug out from them knowingly after 3 years, who's ever going to want to work for you?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I just have a question in the kind of the finance realm of just, in a small town like this, we have a lot of competing resources, and it's often a shell game to try to, manage what the priorities are each year. And one of the things that seems to kind of always be a real challenge is, and you probably know this better than anybody, but, dealing with keeping the roads up and also the trees trimmed back. And we've had some instances here in town, some unfortunate instances with trees. And then, just keeping up with the roads. What would be your strategy to kind of manage that kind of tension between, the competing priorities of things that are in front of us, and also kind of keeping our, our roads, continuing to improve them. And it's always, as you know, in New England, it's always a losing game, but how would you deal with that? Because this is really important to, if you were to ask someone in Sutton, I bet this would be the top thing that they would talk about.
Sure.
So.
What I like to do is I like to plan. I like to look at the situation as a whole, and it's whether this is roads, whether this is trees, whether it's building facility maintenance issues. You got to set a baseline of where you are, and then determine where you want to be. And where you want to be is then going to give you an idea of what has to be done to get you there, and then that gives you the budget goal. Everybody's going to want money. Every program's going to need money. At that point, with a limited resource, you have to prioritize, and you have to understand what the community wants. And if they want, well-maintained roads, it takes more than just an annual Chapter 90 allotment to do that. With using Holden, we need $1 million a year for 121 center line miles of road. We get 600 something from the state in Chapter 90, up until recently, where that number has been going up with the various programs that they've been trying to supplement. But again, it gets back to developing a plan. You have to spend time to create that plan. You have to spend time on consultants to come up with a pavement management plan. You have to use time and money to do, bring in an architectural firm to do a survey of your buildings and develop a baseline. But once you get that plan, and then it's information and sharing the information, and ultimately it's going to come down to what the citizens and taxpayers of the town want to support. And you can nibble around the edges and move money around here and there, but it's, you need to present it so that they can make an informed decision.
So John, relative to Sutton, what are the challenges and the opportunities coming into this position?
For myself?
No.
Or for the town?
The town, what do you see as the
Okay.
town's, I'm sorry, what do you see as the town's challenges and opportunities?
Housing is a huge issue. Employee retention is a big issue. Economic development. Those are the big three that I see, and they're very common to all cities and towns nowadays. Because of the reliance on the property tax, everybody wants to increase economic development as much as you can. The town's fortunate to be right on 146. Which I'm sure puts some pressure on those neighborhoods immediately adjacent to 146 in terms of traffic impacts and noise and living conditions and things like that. But it's also a great resource in that you're 10 minutes to Mass Pike, you're 20 minutes down into Rhode Island, and things like that. The housing is a big issue. It's too expensive wherever we are. But unfortunately, the solution really is developing more housing. And so how do you, the conundrum is identifying opportunities for additional housing that don't change the character of the town. And it's somebody solves that equation, they're going to be a very rich person. I don't have a good answer. I think, the things that the town's doing now with the housing production plan, I think that's a great opportunity to try to get a control of 40Bs before they come in, or become in more. When I was in Southborough, every development was a 40B. In Holden, we've only had one, and that was 10 plus years ago. There's a real tension there. So it's a matter of, you need to be honest with people that if I look at it as, I want my kids to be able to live in Clinton, and I don't know if they can right now. And that's shocking to me, having grown up in Sterling, having to move to Clinton 20 plus years ago, that my kids may not be able to afford something in Clinton, and I'm sure that's very similar to what a lot of the families here in Sutton are experiencing. You have people who have lived here for 50, 60 years, and the kids are like, well, I got to move down to Connecticut or Northeast Connecticut, or I got to head out to Northwest Mass to find something, or up into New Hampshire to find something affordable. I think there has to be a real honest conversation with people that you can't just say no. You can't just say yes, but you got to try to find a way there. And then the third one is employee retention. Municipalities are dying for people. We're not seen as being very sexy or interesting. Having worked in a municipality for 20 plus years, I don't like that, but I realize that's the reality. Some people see it as being an easy job, but it's not. You're dealing with people. And so what do you have to do to make sure that your employees are being valued, are being appreciated, and, you know, honestly being compensated so that they don't run to the next opportunity that might be 10 miles down the road? You know, unfortunately, a lot of these things come down to money. And again, that's not easy. But you know, simply expecting people to keep doing more and more without compensation or without expanding the labor force is really difficult.
You touched on this a little bit around the economic development, but I want to dig into that a little bit more, because there is this tension in Sutton where, you know, people move here and they love to live here because of, you know, it's a small town and it's a lot of open space. I know Holden probably has the things that are important to Holden, but here it's really the open space and the historic assets that are here and are really important to people to kind of maintain and preserve that. And there's tension with that, with kind of the growth of, you know, having to continually grow and have, you know, revenues coming in, and, you know, just with the cost of, you know, running a town. You know, how would you deal with that tension? Because it's very strong here. I mean, people, you know, they get very upset about the loss of, you know, this kind of small town feel, you know, and it feels like it's, for a lot of them, it feels it's already escaped or it's in the process of escaping. So how would you deal with that tension between needing to continually grow, you know, but also, you know, deal with why people are here?
Mm-hmm. I think you have to very strongly identify what you want to protect, the areas that you want to protect, and understand that you're going to lose stuff on the edges. And you've got to be very strategic about, and I guess I shouldn't say lose stuff, but there are areas that are going to change. And what areas may be most appropriate for change? Is it a matter of, you know, building a 3-story apartment complex immediately on the local pond? No. Is it identifying an unused parcel along 146? Maybe. You know, I know the town has had success with Unified and with TIFs. You know, identifying, you don't want to rely too much on TIFs, but they can be a real tool to, you know, perhaps, you know, make your community a little more attractive to corporations than a neighboring committee. I think part of it is also about, you know, in wanting to attract business in, you need to market yourself. Everybody, you know, the buzzword is government should be run like a business. Taking that aside, what do businesses do? They advertise. They market themselves. And you know, I'm not saying that you need to set up big billboards on 146 saying, come work here, or things like that. But you need to be able to network and set those things, and whether it's joining, it wasn't entirely clear if the town is a member of the Blackstone Chamber of Commerce or things like that. It's developing the local ties with people so that, you know, you can informally talk to them, and, you know, you start to hear opportunity maybe opening up on this parcel. What's, you know, is there some place some business that we could encourage to look at? Also, I think looking at the development and licensure process. Every town has the same type of process. You want to, if somebody's looking at, well, I want to put together a small sporting goods store. I know I need to do these things here, I need to know, I guess I gotta do these same things here. I would want somebody to be able to come into Sutton Town Hall and say, I wanna start a business here, what do I need to do? And that there's a checklist of, simple things like you need this, you need a common vic license, you need this, you need to get this inspection from the Board of Health, you're gonna need this. Just set out a guide, a roadmap that people can follow so it's not, so that they don't have to rely on a local lawyer to come in and spend that money to, guide them around to the different boards and things. And, that's one thing that drives me nuts is when somebody comes in and says, oh, I want to do this. Okay, well, this is what you need from Public Works. Oh, okay, great. And then they go out and then they spend the next 3 months doing stuff. And then they're like, all right, we're ready to go. It's like, well, you talked to planning, right? It's like, no. Well, and so then there's, they then spend another 3 months running down what the permit that they need for planning or conservation. And so it's about creating a roadmap of what you need to do. It doesn't mean that you're making it easy, but you're making it transparent and clear and providing certainty. And that is important for anybody wishing to invest their money in the town.
What's this? Good question, thank you. So, looking at your cover letter, seeing that you were very successful in representing the town and being part of the lawsuit, against the city of Worcester. So, and it was a good feat, right? So, what did you learn from that, right? From that experience, and from those learning metrics, where do you see that would benefit you as a town manager?
I think the biggest thing is I can't be afraid to come to a different conclusion after being presented with new information. The genesis of that process was that there was a longtime select board member who had been around when the town had originally when the state had originally expanded the sewers in the town in the late 90s, early 2000s, and when the crafting of the master agreement was going on, he was firmly of the belief that the city was drastically overpaying the town, but he couldn't get anybody else to buy into that. He had gone off the select board. A couple of years later, coincided when I came on board as a public works director, and one of the first things the town manager had asked me was, can you look into this issue again? It was this reoccurring thing that every 5 years it came up. Somebody was like, well, they would talk about rates and, we're getting paying too much to Worcester. So I took a look at it. I looked at the available information that I had and came to the conclusion that based off the agreement, we were probably overpaying, but we were getting the benefits of a certain other portion of the rate that in the wash, if we renegotiated, we'd probably lose that. So it would be a wash. The next day, so I put together a multi-page memo, did a presentation to the town manager, did it to the Board of Selectmen, was up there for an hour and a half talking about this, and basically said, no, we should not do anything with the city. The next day, I got a phone call from a city employee who was also a town resident, who questioned where I'd come up with some information, which was simply on the text of the contracts and the bills that we got. And he said, well, no, you got to look at this because your stormwater costs are actually about half of that bill is actually the city's stormwater costs. And I was like, okay. So then I went back and I recalculated the numbers and found that, holy smokes, they are, insert whatever word you want to use, but it was a drastic overcharge to the town. And, so I could have just, not brought that forward, or, because honestly, the board as a whole wanted to kind of just move past the issue, or kind of, they were trying to satisfy, say that they checked off a box, and they looked at it, we can move past. And, I had to say to the town manager, it's like, no, this is not right. There's a big problem here. And that, to her credit, she brought it to the board, and that's when we then started looking into special counsel, and ultimately we made that decision. And so to me, it's follow the facts. and I can't be so stubborn or full of pride to not admit when things are different from what I've presented. You know, I'll explain why something changed, but I can't be afraid to change my mind. That doesn't mean that I change my mind at the flip of a coin. As an engineer, you gotta prove it to me. And it was a lot of hard work, and I spent days with our special counsel sitting in the basement of the DCR office in West Boylston, pouring through bankers' boxes of documents. And the other part of that is what you think you might be seeing. If people are trying to hide things, they'll hide it, and it takes a lot of work to get to the truth. So I guess, long story short, being diligent, being honest, and being not afraid to change my mind, and being stubborn. They can all work in your favor.
Very good. All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, if I may, obviously the result of that was pretty prosperous for the town, but I'm curious, at the beginning, as you're talking with special counsel and, you know, collectively considering how you might move forward, did that feel risky? I mean, that's a lot of investment, let's say, you make to decide whether to pursue something like that.
Yes, it was scary because we were investing substantial sums of water and sewer enterprise funds. And, you know, anytime you do litigation, it's an unknown. And it was a high risk, high reward. And our counsel, to his credit, said, you know, this may not go anywhere. We felt that the discrepancy was such that we would not be doing a service to the ratepayers if we didn't try to fight it. And it's taken a long time. Again, it's a town of 20,000 people fighting against the state and fighting against the city of Worcester, and everything that they've tried to slow it down, kick it out. But we were, again, stubborn, pernicious, and it's worked. And we're just waiting. We got through a jury trial. Now we're at the appeals court level, and we're just waiting for a decision to come out from them any day.
Thank you.
It was all Julie, by the way. The proper relationship with the schools. Sutton has a school system they're proud of, largest budget in the town. What's a good relationship look like between general government and schools?
Yeah, that's always the source of tensions, and there's two things. One, again, it gets back to we're all on the same team. The tax bill comes from the town of Sutton. People pay the town of Sutton. They're not paying Sutton Town Hall. They're not paying the Sutton School, the superintendent's office, their taxes. They're paying the town of Sutton. And we need to make sure that it's some of it's personality based, that, you know, the superintendent and the town manager are in regular close communication about the needs of both of those groups. And ultimately it comes down to town meeting and the finance committee, you know, making judgments as to where they're going to put the priorities. I think having baseline expectations each year, you know, if every year that the school budget is 65% of the total funds of the town, and it's been like that for 20 years, let's just come to an agreement that new growth, you know, 65 is going to go to the town, it's going to go to the schools, the other part goes to the town, and that's your baseline. You know, obviously, there are going to be needs for some sides to go up more than others, but if there's a common assumption of what money is coming in, that's going to help provide a baseline for your revenue and expenditure projections going forward. And it's, you know, looking for opportunities to share resources. It's again, it's a lot of it is the two leaders of those organizations being in close communication, understanding what each other's needs are and how can you try to meld those together so it doesn't come across as a adversarial process. It's a little probably naive, but I think it's at least the baseline to start with.
John, how would you immerse yourself in Sutton's finances and their budget process?
Lots of reading. Talking, it would be examining the budget with each department head, talking with the board, talking with the finance committee, talking with the school superintendent. The finance director will be my new best friend, maybe the second best friend after the superintendent. It's understanding, looking at what the budget is now, looking at what 5-year projections are. If there are no 5-year projections, then we got to start with that, because you can't figure out where you want to go unless you have an idea of where you need to go. A lot of study. I'm sure I'll be reading a lot of spreadsheets. It's a process, but it's obviously one of the most important processes of this position.
Are you afraid of transparency when you build a budget?
I'm sorry?
Are you afraid of transparency when you build the budget?
Not at all. I think, excuse me. What I do for myself in building a budget, in the public works budget, is I look at each line item every year. And if the trend has been that we've been underspending this line item by 10% every year for the past 5 years, then I'm going to decrease that line item by 10%. I was actually complimented at the last finance committee meeting by one of the members that, thank you for looking at these line items and making these adjustments. Some people go into it thinking it's a game, that it's a negotiation, that you got to come in higher because you know that the finance committee is going to cut it or the board of selectmen is going to cut it. And so, I'll ask for this, but I really need this. That just makes a horrible process for everybody, and it creates a very adversarial process. Our job as department heads and ultimately as the town manager is to present a budget that's real. And each of my department heads should be able to defend and explain every single line item, whether it's an increase or a decrease. And it takes time, it takes trust, and it needs to take, there has to be a two-way street. Citizen board members, they can't be coming in just to say, you're lying, there's a number of different phrases that people use. You need to be able to explain every line item, what your assumptions are, why it is what it is, why it was what it was last year, and why, it was $100,000 last year, but I needed it to be $150,000 this year, and this is why. And this is a one-time bump for this line item, and that once that item is spent for next fiscal year, I pledge to you that I'll bring it down to what it needs to be. Ultimately, it's words, and it's a matter of actions, and it's a matter of what you actually present on that spreadsheet when you show up in front of any board meeting.
In terms of the budget, what would be the areas that would be top priority?
Again, I think I don't want to single out any specific department or school. I think the biggest priority is understanding what the revenue ability of the town, what the appetite is for revenue changes, if any. Do you just stick with your base increase in 2.5? Is there a point approaching where an override might be necessary? You need to understand what your cap is, and then you need to look at each department and make sure that what's being presented is realistic, A, for what their operations are, and B, that it's realistic compared to what they've actually spent over the years. And consistently, if you're able to, consistently over budgeting just so that you generate a large amount of free cash, that's not doing anybody any good.
Thank you, I like that answer.
Could I just follow up on that? I think one of the things that's different with the town manager position than a department head is that you'd be responsible for all of the budget for the town-wide. And I'm not sure that there's any town in Massachusetts that I'm aware of that starts out with a balanced budget. And so I'm wondering what some of the tools might be to kind of bridge the gap between the difference between revenues, available revenues, and sources of revenues, and meeting the needs of the town. You mentioned an override. That's always, a thought, I guess. But how else would you go about trying to balance that budget?
So I think the big thing is, again, understanding what each department's needs are. And, in some ways you can have, a low-end budget, a flat service budget, or in a, desired level of service budget, and understand what those costs are. But at the end of the day, it's the revenue that is, the revenue is the real thing. You can budget as much as you want, you've got to be able to pay for it. And that's where your revenue estimates need to be accurate. Your revenue projections for future years in that 5-year plan need to be accurate.
Well, let me just, if I could interrupt. So we've had in Sutton here a fairly healthy free cash balance over the years. How would you go about utilizing free cash through this process?
So I think having set policies in place in terms of how you're going to use that free cash. In Holden, we have some policies that a certain percentage will be dedicated to the OPEB trust fund, and a certain percentage, no more than a certain percentage, will be used for operational budget issues. One of the things that drives me, especially in public works and with the enterprise fund, is I need to free cash is great. The whole term that free cash isn't free, and you want to make sure that you're spending one-time funds on one-time purchases. And when you start relying on free cash to fund your ongoing base operational needs, you're just running yourself into a hole that you're never going to be able to dig yourself out of easily. So I think coming up, if there are not already policies in place that specifically say, okay, half of the free cash, that's going to go to the stabilization fund. A quarter of no more than 15% of the free cash goes to operational needs. Some of it goes to capital needs. Some of it goes to this trust fund and things like that. I think, again, having that expectation where, yes, you can fiddle around the edges, but if everybody goes in knowing that, okay, there's $5 million of free cash, that's great, but really only, 500,000 of that can we rely on using for operational budget needs. I'm just using numbers that may not be real, but I think that's part of the process is using those things and trying to stay on the path of one-time funds for one-time expenditures.
Okay, good, thank you.
So we have a little bit less than 15 minutes, so I'm just going to start going through some of these questions. Related to personnel management, what are some of the human resource issues and needs that you would address in this position?
Having proper human resource policies in place. Honestly, that's not something I've looked at, so I don't know where the town is with that. To be honest, where I come from, that's an area that's lacking, and it creates a lot of pressure and uncertainty for department heads sometimes with how they're working through different processes. So I think taking a fresh look at that, taking care of the people is the other part of the HR situation I referred to, is making sure people are compensated fairly, are recognized, are acknowledged, and we all spend too many hours a day at our workplaces, and nobody wants to be miserable going into work. And you got to find a way to have fun somehow, and that's not always easy, but there's ways of bringing some levity into things can help.
Do you have experience building HR-based policies?
I do not. I took a class that dealt with that as part of the graduate certificate program in terms of general HR policies. I've been involved with 5 different union contract negotiations, so I have a feel for that, that process. But in terms of actually creating a legally defensible HR policy, that's where you need to rely on experts.
All right, well, the reason why I ask is I'm sure you know the town is involved in a lawsuit that was filed by a ranking officer in the police department when this board essentially decided that the individual is not fit for promotion to police chief. This litigation involves not only the town, 3 members of this board, 2 members of the police department personally, as well as the Sergeant and Patrolmen's Association. Speaking only for myself, I made the decision voting against promotion for the police chief primarily due to the fact that the union publicly tendered a unanimous vote of no confidence against the promotion. Now, the problem is many of the issues surrounding the no to vote confidence, which were well known in town and well known in the regional policing community, was largely ignored and allowed to fester by the town manager because we failed to implement coherent and concrete HR standards. And as you know, when those standards are not in place, it gives rise to litigation. You've successfully embroiled yourself in a legal suit. But how would you work with the HR director to address situations like this to ensure that the town going forward can avoid similar circumstances?
I think, speaking broadly, a lot of times, there are things that people are use long-term practices that I like to say they work until they don't work. And again, for things that are that level of importance, and when I say level of importance, there are areas of specialties that we may not find any of those experts in municipal government, whether it's policing, whether it's human resources, whether there's a specific type of water main project that needs to be done. You can't be afraid to acknowledge where your limitations are and get help from outside sources and use, you can try to build build things yourself. Municipalities, we love to copy and paste. That can work until it doesn't work. So there needs to be review at a minimum of things by an outside expert, and whether that's relying on specialized labor counsel or some other specialized human resource firm. You have to acknowledge, again, that you can't be afraid to say we don't know, and we need to find somebody to tell us what we don't know and what we need to do.
That last statement, I really appreciate. Thank you.
So less than 10 minutes. So at this point, maybe John, can you address the relationship with the board? What's a successful relationship look like between a town manager and the board?
I think trust and transparency, and a willingness to communicate. We both need to be able to tell each other bad news, whether we like it or not. When bad news doesn't get better with age, and you can't hide something because it ends up screwing things up for everybody. You need to be. I need to know. I need the board to be transparent about what they want from this position, what they want for the town, and when I know those things, I'm able to guide the ship to reach those destinations. If I'm operating in a fog bank, I can blow on the foghorn all I want, but if nobody's listening and nobody's telling me where to go, that doesn't mean I'm not going to plow into the iceberg. It's a little dramatic, but honestly, it's so much in life just comes down to communication and being open and honest. I tend to be honest, sometimes too honest for some people, but by being open in communicating my values and providing the advice to the board. Now, you may choose to ignore it, but I've done my job by providing you what I think is the best practice for the town going forward, and understanding that everybody wants the town to succeed and be successful and provide a quality of life to its residents at as low as cost as possible. Ultimately, after a year, after 3 years, I want to be able to anticipate where you want it. When we bring up a matter, I want to be able to know, all right, where is this going to go based off of past practices, past personalities, past discussions. And I want you folks to know, well, if we give this idea to Woodsmall, is he just, what is he going to say? Is he just going to run us off, or is he going to, tell us, okay, that makes sense, and let's do it? I think it's building that level of trust is just huge.
What about the flip side? What happens if you presented the matter to the board and the board voted against it? How would you handle that?
I throw my hands up and storm out. On a personal level, I'm a very competitive person, and I hate to lose. But just because, you can lose a battle but still win the war. And this is a job, and I can't take things personally. Because if I take everything every decision that is ignored or opposite of what I recommend, I'm going to be a puddle of mud on the side of the road someplace. You have to have a thick skin. You have to be confident in what you believe in, confident in the advice and input that you're getting from the department heads, that in our professional opinion, this is what we think you should do. You folks answer to the citizens, the voters. You have to defend what you do. So, we both have to, at the end of the day, defend our decisions and be comfortable with them.
I just wanted, you done? I just want to dig into a little bit around, so an example of if you have multiple members of the board coming to you around an issue that kind of goes against what you kind of want, but privately, not necessarily in the meeting, how would you deal with that if you want that outcome to come, but they're warning you that there's, separately that there's an issue? How do you deal with that kind of conflict? Because it's not necessarily in the public space yet, or even in the select board. Mm-hmm. How would you deal with that issue?
I think it's understanding what is the basis of the warning, and what in the situation are they potentially uncomfortable with or against, and being able to provide information that may help them reach a level of comfort with making such a decision. At the same time, if I have 5 different board members, who are reaching out separately saying, don't do this, there's a certain level of preservation that you got to think about. Is this really, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Right. Okay.
Okay, so we're at the end at this point. Unless there's other questions from board members, I'm going to ask John to provide his closing statement to the board.
Okay. Again, thank you very much for allowing me to be here and advancing me to the stage. I realize as a public works director, it might be a little bit of a different flavor of candidate that you may be seeing. I go back to the fact that I've been working in municipalities now for 20 plus years, which is a little scary to say, but I've seen a wide variety of great town managers, good boards of selectmen, and how they select boards and how they work. I've been able to work in some really well-managed, professionally managed towns. Each one is different, and each one has their own set of resources, but the common threads through that is professional management of your staff, trust in that professional management, and communication, and being able to, whether I'm doing that here as department head over 33 people, or in Holden, or doing it here as a town manager for a number of different divisions, different departments, you know, I'm not an expert on everything in public works. I'd like to think so. I'm regularly reminded that's not the case. I'm not an expert on every part of town management. What I am an expert on, I would say, is knowing how municipalities work, what a good municipality does, and being able to support my folks to get the information I need to identify their needs and advocate for those needs and advocate for the town as a whole.
So, John, thank you. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you very much.
As you're aware, the board is interviewing tonight. They will be deliberating on Wednesday night, and you'll be hearing from Julie and myself, post that as to your status.
All right.
So, okay, thank you for coming out to Sutton tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for coming out. See you.
Jeffrey, nice to meet you.
Is that fresh?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
There was a water there, should you need it.
All right, Joe, have a seat, please. We're ready to get started, a few minutes early here.
Just make sure we're on TV. Okay, we're good, thank you.
Okay, all set? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our third candidate for the evening, Joe Laydon. And Joe, welcome to Sutton, and congratulations on being a finalist here. So why don't we start by you taking a few minutes to tell us about your history and your specific interest in this position, and why do you think you would be successful here?
First, I'm very happy to be in front of you. Very honored to be selected as one of the finalists. For me, this is sort of coming home in a way. I grew up in Sutton. I used to ride my bike to Hassett Field for soccer practice. I think I passed by this tree that made this table so many times I probably couldn't count. Product of the Sutton school system. And Sutton had always been, growing up, a really special place. And even now, while I don't live in Sutton, I'm a mile from the border. I'm in Sutton constantly. And really consider it where, in my heart, I'm home, going to Whittier Farm, getting milk on the weekends. This is a place that I've continued to care about. It's a region that I've continued to care about. Blackstone Valley, I've worked, as you can see, Wayland West and Stoughton, but I always lived in the Blackstone Valley, outside of a short stint in Tennessee and Vermont, then came back. So a little about myself. Live in Northbridge with my family, 3 daughters, 2 in college, 1 a junior at BVT. Like doing a lot of things, hiking, taking the dogs to Purgatory, just being there in support of the family. Growing up, did the typical Sutton things, soccer, Fuller Hamlets, working at Pleasant Valley. Over really the last 35, 40 years, I've also seen how Sutton has changed, and actually in my undergrad at WPI, first got my first taste of planning in general by doing a project on the impact the Blackstone Canal had on the development in Sutton. That sort of is what started my career on municipal government, and how I decided to become a town planner. And even in some of the positions, the small town environment is something that I really enjoyed and kept coming back to. So currently I'm the town manager in Upton. I always wanted to work in a small town, and when Sutton came along, I just felt I had to go for it. I feel I would have kicked myself had I not tried, and that's why I'm here with you tonight.
Great. So how would you work with the board in understanding the vision of the board for the town? And what do you see as your role in that process, as well as setting a path for its implementation?
So with the select board being primarily responsible for setting policy, I'd be sitting down talking with you as a board and as individuals to try to identify what your principal concerns are. What are some of the things that you feel is important? As well as some of the things that constituents are talking to you about. The town has a number of planning documents that also feed that plan going forward, and really working with the board as a partner and trying to formulate a path forward. I view myself as taking the policy set by the board and basically finding ways to run with it. Through my experience as a community development director, as a town planner, and now as a town manager, I've been fortunate to receive a number of grants, for a number of grants, and undertake different projects that could benefit the town of Sutton as you're trying to formulate that path forward.
Could I inject my question? Thank you. Do you have any personal or professional relationships with any member or members that served on the screening committee?
I have a professional relationship in that I've known Jen Hager as the town planner for the last 25 years. I was the town planner in Grafton. She was here. We know each other professionally. I also professionally, Pat Morris works for the town of Upton as the veterans agent.
Was that properly disclosed prior to his interview? Okay, very good. What about this board? Do you know anyone in this board? Personally or professionally?
No, I've met both of you at MMA just recently, and that's the extent of it.
Any other town employees?
There's the town assessor who used to work for me in Grafton, but it was only for a short period, for 2 months, before she came to Sutton.
Grafton or Upton?
In Upton.
Upton, okay, thank you.
So, the board is in consensus that leadership's critical in this hire. What skills and approach will you bring to the table to address this?
So I think one of the main skills is listening and taking in various perspectives. Everyone has their own perspective as far as what's important and how to move forward, and that's where some of my experience as a planner I think I really rely on is hearing what people are thinking, their thoughts, their values, their importance, and making sure that they also feel heard. And as a planner now, I continue in this role as a town manager, finding consensus and consensus through communicating, providing information to the board in timely fashion in advance, as well as to the public, so that people know what are some of the important decisions that are being made. Also, including staff. There's many staff within Town Hall who they've been on the front lines on a number of projects, finding out their perspectives, what things have been challenging, and what ways that they can be supported. I really view the town manager as sort of being that sound box, that resource for others to really rely on, and to support them in their roles trying to move the town forward.
So in Sutton, what do you think are the challenges and the opportunities you'll be facing coming to the community?
I think some of the challenges that Sutton has had have been some of those challenges that date back a number of years. Sutton is in a great location, especially with the 146 Mass Pike interchange. Developers continue to focus more on the Blackstone Valley and how to balance the pressures of development, property rights, where we have property owners who maybe are looking to benefit their families, against the character of Sutton, and what residents come to the town and have been raised their whole lives in town valuing. How to find that balance. Mentioned that, I remember Hassett Field as where I played youth soccer, and even through high school, when we were redoing the fields at the high school. Now to see that as Galaxy Developments Market 32, that's something that the town had wanted to see additional growth to start to support and take the burden off of residential shoulders, especially with continuing escalation of educational costs and school costs. So that balancing of needs for existing and future services against that town character and the threat of 40Bs, and now with MBTA communities, those are all really large issues that other towns had maybe grappled a little bit earlier, but it's clearly on Sutton's doorstep. And looking at the housing production plan that you're all working on is a primary focus on trying to get it right and make sure that you get it right for the town of Sutton.
I'd like to dig into that a little bit more, particularly around that tension that you're talking about. So you've already kind of touched on this a little bit, and having come from Sutton and kind of living around Sutton, you probably know this, but Sutton is very, very proud of being kind of a farm, open space community. It's very important that people maintain. That's why they move here. That's why they continue to live here. Also, the historic nature of the town and the historic assets are really important to people. How would you deal with that tension, a little bit more in depth around that people kind of wanting things to kind of be that way because they live here, but also recognizing that in order to kind of keep the town kind of, the only way we continue to be able to stay up with our expenses is through increasing revenues. And so, the economic development piece of that, and how would you manage that tension around that?
So I think one of the main things to address sort of that balancing, that tension in the town is really to be proactive and to find ways to be out and ahead. And if you have areas like I've seen some of the plans that Housing Production Committee is working on, if you have ideas where you want to see development, then highlight that, sell it as far as market it. Identify it as opportunities and try to partner with people within the town, within the development agreement to make that happen. As the community development director in Grafton, we identified about 10 priority development sites. And out of my office, we produced basically fact sheets that identified what the potential, did they have water or sewer, what was the development that was allowed by zoning. And when companies either came because they were looking for space or housing developers, we could basically say, we've already thought about this. Here's a property that we'd like you to focus on. The state periodically will throw out inquiries as far as a company X, Y, and Z is looking for space. We develop these fact sheets as a way of proactively saying, well, instead of thinking about, well, we maybe have a property in mind and then sort of communicating and working it out. We were proactive in basically saying, this is where we'd like to see development. I think that's one of the opportunities here in Sutton is really taking inventory as far as where would you like to see it and what kinds of development, because it is easier to try to market towards those than after the fact be faced with an application that realistically you wish they never submitted in the first place. And that's one of the unique opportunities as far as working with planning board, planning staff, the board and the town manager, able to formulate relationships with Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce to really try to partner with maybe some companies that are looking at expanding. There's different opportunities like Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce had their home show a couple weeks ago in Northbridge, and while I was in Grafton, we would go to some of those and just say, here's opportunities, getting yourself out so that you're more proactive than reactive. And that's the hard thing is very often there's all these conversations on the side, a property owner may be talking to a developer, and then we're on the receiving end. Once you find out they've really engaged an engineer, started developing plans, then towns are reacting. So the more that can get out in front, be more proactive, engage in some of the development community, not to attract it, but to try to say, this is what we're looking for, so people know up front, what Sutton would like to see.
Question. You mentioned here that you were successful in bringing down the size of a 40B project. Can you extrapolate on that and see how those best practices would be applicable to Sutton?
So I think part of that is just really having a dialogue and open conversation as far as what the concerns of the town are, what are the main drivers, and having a conversation as far as what does it really take for development to occur. Having a discussion about the finances and ways that maybe there's infrastructure needs that just need to be addressed. Developers very often, they know where their numbers are, and depending on their team, they know what they can and can't do as far as bringing numbers down. And so having a conversation, a realistic conversation as far as what would that look like, and not just saying no for no's sake. You're going to get those developments where no matter what, this is the wrong spot, the wrong way, and it's worth the fight. But there's somewhere if you can find some avenue to reduce down the impacts, because especially with 40Bs, as long as the town is under the 10%, And provided that it hasn't already achieved some form of safe harbor, there's always a threat. And safe harbor doesn't mean you deny any 40B that comes in. It just means you can be picky. You can deny ones you don't like. But with the housing plan committee doing their work, and that's part of the strategy they're looking for, how to moderate that that sort of growth that may happen with applications coming into the town is really a good way to try to moderate that. Otherwise, without a housing production plan, without having that plan forward, you can be going through this cycle of 40B after 40B and just feel that the character is sort of slipping away.
What's the single most important characteristic of an effective town manager?
I think the first thing is listening, listening to the board, listening to staff, listening to residents, and then also communicating, being able to communicate the issues that the town faces in an open and honest way. One of the ways that I currently do that is once a month I have a coffee with the town manager at the senior center. No set agenda. I talk about the issues that are on the town side, and any heat that's coming in, I just receive. Sometimes it's a little tougher than others, but that's the only way to really get some of the feedback, and I found that as beneficial for me. But also, as elected members, you're hearing from your constituents in town, your own constituents, as far as what's important, and town manager can sometimes seem like an intimidating position, and which it really isn't. But some people feel more comfortable talking to elected members or even other board members, and finding a way to, as a group, hear all of that, discuss it, and find ways forward. Those are some of the things that important for a town manager.
What about listening to your department heads?
Department heads are extremely important because, one, especially in a town like Sutton where you've had a lot of department heads who have been here for a while, they know everyone. They know their staff. Their staff is on the street. Their staff is maybe interacting with someone because they're fixing a pothole and someone had damaged their car by hitting a pothole or a tree that needs to be taken down. Staff, whether it's department heads all the way down, those we're all one team working for a town in any way that communication can feed back in both directions, top down, from bottom up. That's what makes town government work in such amazing ways, where local towns have very limited resources, but Sutton, at least from my appearance, and I know it's absolutely the case in Upton, we go the extra mile to make sure that things are done. And it's from people that are either, the assessors in town, the planner, conservation, or DPW, police or fire. They're the ones that interact with people the most. And the more that to get that feedback back to the town manager, that's invaluable.
What happens if the department head tells you something, a need that you don't necessarily see as a priority? How would you deal with that situation?
Well, I think that's one of the challenges that comes up during budget season. Budgets are basically how we're funding the goals of the upcoming year, the projects that the towns are going to be trying to work on. If there's something that just can't afford, and I've told this with my existing staff, let's find a way to do it. If something is important, but we don't have the resources, there are ways that we can manage things. We can go after grants. We can find other ways to participate. We can ask for assistance from the community, depending on what that need is. I am not one to say no. I'm one to support my department heads and staff in finding a way to say yes.
All right, well, here, I got an actual example for you. So as was disclosed at a selectman meeting, thanks to a recent presentation by Fire Chief Matt Belcito, he had, as was disclosed, apparently had been requesting a staffing evaluation for 6 years. However, Mr. Smith had stated on camera the meeting before that he had been ignoring those requests because he knew what the outcome was going to be. Well, obviously, he knew what the outcome was going to be because if you look at our on-call department, we have more than 50% of the staff is 40 or older. So we're getting to the point where we're not going to have a fire department. But he ignored it, kicked the can down the road. And to make matters worse, as I'm sure you know, the procurement process for apparatus is backlogged several years. And also, as we've been handed a report to the town, there are going to be some new federally mandated OSHA standards, which we just don't have the means to fund. How would we deal with this? How would you deal with this?
So I think one of the things, and this is where so many of towns around Sutton are dealing with reductions and call volunteers as people's lives have gotten complicated. I remember, when I was in high school, there was people in high school that had a radio and they'd be going out on calls. That's one of those challenges that looking at staffing levels, looking at different models, looking and talking to neighboring towns is extremely important, just like succession planning in other departments, and finding ways to do those types of projects is extremely important, especially as we're seeing this transition. And Upton, we're at the same spot. We have a full-time fire, EMS, paramedic union, but the majority of the calls are supported by call volunteers. We're talking about the exact same thing, undergoing a study, because it's one thing to identify that we need to move to more of a permanent staffing, but there's only so much a town can afford, and there's different ways to look at different models and what is going to be appropriate from what fits within Sutton, and also what is something that could be implemented and afforded by Sutton. That's part of sort of the challenge that not only does it rest on the town manager, but also rests with the board, because as the board is setting long-term financial policies and making sure that succession planning is in place, board and the town manager should also be understanding from residents, but also from other boards, what are important. In past towns, we've had sort of all staff and all board meetings to talk about what, sort of in an informal environment, what are some of the things on the horizon that we need to be mindful of. And staffing on all levels within small towns is crucially important right now to try to find a way forward. And there's as long as it's something that, for me, if a department head feels like this is necessary, I personally feel that that is something that the board should know, because they're the ones overseeing the implementation. They're the ones calling up the call people. They're seeing who's responding. And if there are challenges that then impact the safety and livelihood of residents in the town, the board should have a heads up like, hey, this is going to be an emerging issue that we have to find a way forward.
So just to be clear, so even if it's something that you would personally disagree with, you'd still present it to the board, even
Yes.
if it's going to be a potential long-term problem?
Sorry, I need a sip of water.
No worries. I was going to do the same.
So, and this is where I sort of fall back on sort of my town planner experience. I view myself as really more of a consensus builder, that leading through consensus. That means trying to get pieces of information from everyone on the team. There may be things that, for right now, maybe it doesn't seem that it's needed, but the exercise of going through that planning process, looking to see what is important. It may be a recommendation of me to the board that at this time, maybe we can't implement it. But the board is the one that's setting policy decisions. The board is the one that's looking in the drafting of a budget, what is important, what we need to move in. And ultimately, the board is responsible to electors. So that ends up being how I view it. I would provide my thoughts and analysis, but that's a policy decision in my mind, on whether a town should undergo a staffing study to contemplate changes to its call department structure.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So, Joe,
Quick question. So, in your capacity of dealing with the select board, do you set the agenda? Does the chairman set the agenda, or chairwoman set the agenda? Or is it collaborative?
It's collaborative. So I take the first stab and then either talk or share with the current chair. And then we send it out to the whole board for them basically to review, thumbs up, thumbs down before it gets posted.
So the whole board looks at the agenda in a sense
Yes.
before approving
Yep.
it, before it's sent out. Very good.
And what would be the process for us to add an item to the, listen, you're working with the chair, and if one of the board members wants to add, or even
So-
even a citizen wants to add an item to what would be the process?
So, sort of take the citizen side first. So, like Sutton, Upton has public comment. So, if someone asks for something to be placed on the agenda first, I let the chair know, and then we have a discussion. Or I invite them to say, you know what? Following the town manager's report, we have public comment. I'd encourage you to come in, speak about it, and I always give the board a heads up, especially if I know about it coming in advance, so they can be prepared. Yeah, let's schedule that for an agenda session, because many times I can work to resolve issues up front, but some of it's a policy decision. And letting them come in and, quite frankly, get camera time. It's one thing just to have emails on the side and someone's trying to figure out something. We have, in Upton, we have Heritage Day. It's the last weekend of September. And it's very similar to Chain of Lights, except we just have it in the center of Upton. Lots of coordination with vendors, and it's a great event. It's coordinated by the Historical Society, but they're finding, like, this is getting a lot. We need help. And I'm like, you know what? That's something, speak at public comment. Ask the board, like, how do we get help? And the board is saying, once we had our last meeting, yeah, let's put out the word that we're looking for volunteers. Using this public microphone is a unique way to make sure that people know of upcoming needs and ways to get on the agenda. If someone is specifically asking, I want to raise this topic, I always coordinate with the chair. How do we want to approach this? We've had conversations with someone requesting things, just so they can understand the parameters as far as what the request is. As far as board members, in Upton it's 3 members. So it's pretty easy to sort of come to consensus on a lot of items, especially as it results with getting things on the agenda. Typically, if one member says, I'd like to see this, then it's just me coordinating with the chair, like, hey, yeah, let's add that on. But also, I keep a tickler list on topics that we're continuing to work on. Some of these things, like review of select board policies, those sometimes can be put to the side and you're not looking at them for another year. But having some things that we need to dedicate time to focus our attention on and to know, especially if they're time sensitive, I use the tickler list to make sure that the whole board is aware what are some of the really important things, but also some of the sort of longer term things that maybe aren't the fire at the moment, but we need to make general progress to programming it with the board, having a discussion, because it also is very important.
Thank you.
Joe,
I just have one more question, really quick. So do you recommend that we distribute the materials that you send to the select board out to the public prior to the meeting?
That's for the board, that's a very great discussion to have. In Upton, I do. And when I first joined Upton, I reviewed with 3 members at the time. Here's the process that I had in Littleton. We prepared a whole packet. Fridays sometimes were not fun days because we're then rushing to produce the packet, get it out on the website, send it out to the board, but then it was available for the public as well. So the board saw all the supportive information as well as the public. I've gotten a lot of feedback in my time in Upton that residents really like that they like what is being reviewed by the board, what inputs get added into the board's decision-making process. That process, which I basically just inherited from Littleton, was essentially what I was doing in Grafton and Weston as well. We put all of our materials online in Grafton for the planning board, all of the application materials, staff memos. My view is the more that you can get out there very often, the better. And sometimes even those challenging topics, no matter what, everyone finds out. It's either after or before the case. I'd rather address things up front. Get it out there. It's a worthwhile conversation. In the end, every single thing we do is public, except for those cases that town council advises it's not. And that's part of the discourse that we have in Upton that I appreciated in my other towns as well, and would have that conversation with the board should I be successful.
Thank you. So as a product of Sutton schools, you know how important Sutton schools are here.
Yeah.
What's a good relationship look like between general government and schools?
I think one of the main things is having a good collaborative relationship with superintendent, with school officials, with board officials, because how a town moves forward and succeeds is so dependent on the schools themselves. And watching your meetings, especially your budget meetings and school committee meetings this season, it's clear that everyone is trying to find that balance. Everyone can always use $1 more. Everyone can use one more staff person more. And trying to find that balance, and also to communicate to the residents is really one of the challenges that local officials, town manager, board members really face, because we don't have a blank check that we can write to give everyone what they want. And ultimately, school committee and select board, it's the two of you as elected bodies that really get to identify where those dollars are spent. And working collaboratively and well with the superintendent and their staff, so that everyone can have the correct information, because we're all rowing in the same direction. I currently in Mendon Upton, it's a regional school district, but I have quarterly meetings with the Mendon town administrator and the Mendon Upton superintendent and business manager together. We have a great working relationship. There's 3 capital articles, all debt exclusion, that the district is bringing forward to the town. And we're on a constant email and telephone chain, trying to make sure that we have all of the information, that they understand the concerns that are being discussed in Upton and Mendon, and that we're not we're working very collaboratively through that process.
Great. Joe, I'm going to switch to finance a little bit. We're interested in your financial planning experience and your financial management strategies for ensuring organizational sustainability. Can you explain to us your experience with preparation of annual budgets, capital, operating, debt exclusion if it arises?
Yeah.
And the second part of the question is, and what is your financial philosophy?
So one element of that is trying to do as much for as little as possible. What I mean by that is, as a planner, I've always looked at finding different ways to achieve results that weren't funded by the town, looking for grants, partnering with other groups. in order to try to do as much without really going to town meeting for a funding request. That continues here in Upton with, we were successful in getting $4.2 million in Housing Works grant award for construction of water and sewer extension to support a housing project. Working with not only Representative David Moradian, who serves us, but also with Senator Fatman to secure funding and to make sure that they're aware of funding priorities. Sort of backing up, within the town of Littleton, after about 3 months as the assistant town administrator, I found myself as the interim town administrator. And that was right with COVID. And one of the first things, once things started getting a little bit more certain, had to not only amend the FY20 budget, but then also start planning for FY21. And there was a significant amount of uncertainty. And not only that, the town was going to be looking for a town administrator as well. So working with department heads, working with the finance director, not only an assessor, I mean basically the whole senior management team, just identifying what kind of condition do we think we're going to be in, what's the message coming out from the state, and what are some of our needs that we can hold off on and wait to see how we come out. Fortunately or unfortunately for Littleton, because of being on 495, there was considerable lack of revenue because no one was going to stay in hotels anymore and no one was eating at restaurants. So they had a significant reduction in revenue coming in from meals as well as room tax. So looking and delaying some initiatives that were undertaken or cutting back in some areas, making sure that we could protect core services was really what we started focusing on. Fortunately, we started coming out of COVID and could start looking at sort of restoring some of those services. But we had to make sure that services like fire, EMS, and police were protected because those were the people that were visiting the nursing homes and making the trips to the hospital. In Upton, while I have a finance director, my finance director is part-time, and per his contract, which I didn't draft, was my predecessor, was fully remote. How it was described to me is I'm the daytime finance director. When there's problems going on, I'm the one that really figures things out, and that continues to this day. Working with department heads, formulating the budget message. Upton, similar to Sutton, there's not a lot of industrial growth. We have basically a section of 140 and the Grafton-Upton Railroad. 92% of our tax base is coming from residential residences. So we are trying to make sure that we're cognizant on the impact that property taxpayers will have, and especially our seniors, while also recognizing that, and just over the last 12 months, we also had police, DPW, and fire contracts all come up. And the board had made one of the goals when I got there, succession planning and also employee retention. Ironically, within my first month, had various positions need to fill, some unfortunately and some because they left to go to other towns. But over a 2-year period, also had to fill about 8 high-level positions within town, all while making sure that financially we could afford it, continue to pave our roads. I review all of the expense warrants. I double-check the finance director. If there's $5 in sales tax, it's like, hey, we need to make sure if we can't get this back, we need to make sure that this department is taking care of things so that we can make sure that we're paying attention to the small things. Not paying attention to some of the small things can lead to errors on the big things. So I work very closely with the finance committee. The finance committee chair is in my office a couple times a week. going over things, and maintaining that level of communication as we go through the budgetary process, is crucially important. And making sure that all of the information, I prepare memos that have all the supportive information for any of the new budgetary requests, as well as even holding sessions with the board, explaining before we settle a contract what are elements, so that they can be comfortable knowing what that contract is gonna look like. So
Do you do
try
that
to
with-
involve people as much as possible.
Sorry, do you do that with all contracts, even given to like department heads, or would you have advanced communications, letting the board know exactly?
When there's significant changes, so for example, we had DPW director, and when we had staffing changes, brought in facilities under that person. Because that represented significant changes in duties as well as compensation, that was reviewed, not for the board's approval, but so that they could understand why I was making the change and what the financial benefit was. Did it for their information, not for their approval, and to make sure that they weren't caught by surprise. Like Sutton, Upton has a town manager form of government, so under the Town Managers Act, I have authority to enter into contracts with various staff. But that doesn't mean I don't try to be upfront and forward, because those contracts are all public documents. They can, and for many towns, get posted to their website. Anyone can request them once they're executed, and I don't want any sort of gotchas or any sort of surprises that people would say, "Hey, this is crazy. What were you agreeing to under this?" So I try to include the board just so that they're aware of many of those changes, because also you have good department heads. You want to hold on to them. And very often the board is motivated to hold on to them, making sure that they can stay as a valued and motivated employee.
Question, in dealing with your department heads in capital planning, yearly, is how transparent are you with the select board of, for instance, for example, there's 15 items altogether, right? And you have a decision-making process. Let it be ranked. So can you tell us more about that process?
Oh, sure.
And how transparent it is to the board of that decision-making process, of all 15, for example?
Sorry, I meant to get to that side of it on capital. In Upton, we're in a little bit of a transition just about our capital process. 2 managers ago, they had gone through a very lengthy inventory, whole notebook, documenting all of the rolling stock, all of the facilities. That, as the town started going through the late teens, did not get updated. We have a spreadsheet, and that's something that continue to update along with department heads. We share that with, we have a capital budget committee, as well as FinCom and Select Board, that all have a role. So they see this full spreadsheet, all the priorities, not only for the current year, but then also looking forward to 2033. That would be quite the plan to go out 100 years. And we recently, under the Community Compact, got awarded $35,000 to retain the Collins Center to update our capital plan, to really do a full assessment, and then to make sure that we get a implementable product as an end result, because that's one of the things that want to make sure that the town has something that just doesn't get put back on the shelf and sort of becomes irrelevant, but that can move forward and live. I encourage the boards, when they're submitting articles and capital, to identify all the things that they need. We sit down and we update that spreadsheet on an annual basis in end of October, identifying not only the current, but also what can sort of be delayed, because there are some things that, you know what, we thought that backhoe was really in bad shape, but we think we can get one more year, and we'd like to hold off on that. We have those conversations, present that to the select board, and we have a joint select board and finance committee meeting, where then the department head is presenting their capital plan, and sometimes things are fluid. A discussion was about, well, looking out, you have an ambulance coming in at next year? What's the lead time? And it just happened as part of the conversation that the fire chief was like, well, you know, right now they're about 1.5 years, 2 years. We're a little concerned that maybe if we wait, we could be without an ambulance. And as part of that sort of fluid discussion with the board, finance committee, myself, police chief, we have a public safety director, and fire chief, it was decided, well, let's at least look to see, can we bump that up? And he was able to get a pre-production commitment that then also saved about $150,000 over what we were originally budgeting in 1 year out. So having that discussion, having that openness to revisit things, because in the end, this is impacting our ability to plow roads, educate our kids, respond to emergencies, and throughout a year, things change. Plans are intended to be revisited and changed if necessary.
Quick question, just to follow up, is so of that capital planning process, is some of those items that relative to the school that is not part of the school budget, which is separate?
For Upton, because we are part of the regional, their capital is outside. However, they need a new roof. Communicating that out to the towns, and we have a article, we were invited to participate through MSBA, that we've been supported. But then also, they have capital subcommittee meetings and budget subcommittee meetings. I attend all those on the district level, so that I'm seeing this in advance and seeing that there's basically $35 million worth of delayed maintenance, deferred maintenance that is not being done. So when they presented a article for 10 million, I'm able to communicate to the select board, there's a bunch of other work that still will need to be done. This is going to only be a piece. So I try to present all that information to the select board and make sure that they're fully aware as far as what is also coming down the pike.
Thank you.
I just have one more question on the finances from my perspective. So this kind of goes around to an important issue that is facing the town, and probably in Upton as well, is just around the trees and the roads. Like, the roads are always in difficult condition. It's, trying to keep ahead of it. And trees have been actually, as you probably see in the news, we've had some incidents here in Sutton, and it's a big topic for people that they worry about. But as you know, there's a lot of competing priorities in a small town. And sometimes the trees and the roads can kind of fall to the back burner a little bit, just for need, right? Mm-hmm. But how would you manage that? Because it's become a really important issue to the residents. And so how would you manage that kind of competing, like keeping progress and making good progress, because we need that progress, but also managing the fact that it costs a tremendous amount to pave a road and, to hire a company to come cut trees. And so how do you?
And that's where, you've uniquely been able to sort of identify a funding source to take care of a bunch all at once. Small towns, the beauty is the roads, the trees, but as we've seen through some of the gypsy moth infestations we've had, and some of the drought, they've taken a whack over the last couple of years. And like any sort of longer term maintenance, identifying a plan forward, a sustainable funding mechanism that can be tapped into, is going to be important. And really I think the work, and I've seen it along Central Turnpike and Mendon Road as well, where some trees have been taken down, and definitely it is expensive, but also I'm hopeful that it will make a noticeable impact. But these are things that are year after year going to be a commitment, and trying to identify what is a reasonable level to commit to, I think, is one of those things, working with the select board, your DPW director, highway superintendent, to identify how to go about and achieve that. but then also to make sure for residents that view that as very important, that it gets balanced against, some of these streets are scenic streets. There's laws that also come into play. Granted, for health and safety, you can still get a tree taken down, but balancing the rural and, for some of the streets, forested look up against, what is a clear safety hazard, especially with some of these trees, that's a long-term commitment because there's too many for any town to achieve within 1 year or 2 year or even 5 year. And conditions change also significantly. And is that, looking at other options, can you go in with another town for maybe a larger contract to sort of negotiate down a contract price? To get one tree taken down is, for a property owner, is significant cost. For the town, there's some savings that the town has through doing more sections, but it's still so expensive. Working with National Grid to try to identify, can we get together and identify some of these and work together, and maybe have the look at contracting opportunities. But working with the board on really identifying that as a long-term priority would be the first place I'd start.
Thank you.
So we're
I
at
just want to
the-
ask one quick,
Yep, that's-
one final, which is,
Just letting you know, we're just below 10 minutes now, so.
all right, this won't take 10 minutes, I don't think. When you're faced annually with the annual shortfall in revenues and the expenses being too great, how have you handled that in the past in terms of, I don't know if Upton's looking at an override situation or not. I don't know that. But what have you do? We have a fairly healthy free cash balance. Do you use that to plug holes? Do you use?
So I'm aware that Sutton has free cash policy, and that I believe basically if you exceed a certain amount, you can use $50,000. That's like the cap. I mean, the first place you start is basically your financial policies, identifying specifically how you would approach it. The policies help really with that roadmap going forward. In Upton, the override talk is for next year. This year, we're squeaking by. I did have to close. I have to provide the select board and finance committee with a balanced budget. I can't show anything in the negative, so I had to ask my department heads to all work together to close a $127,000 hole in the budget. And we identified, I had a memo, here's what's being cut, the amount, and what that line is, so that the select board and the finance committee could understand, like, okay, we may be cutting it, but that's not a permanent cut. That's to balance this budget, and to evaluate, maybe we should look at some other cuts. There are some things that some departments wanted. It's like, we'll have to look to see if we have some better days next year or the year forward, because something that our Elder and Social Services Department may want is then bumping up against fire department with wanting additional full-time employees, and bumping up against DPW wanting to pave more roads.
Should we use our free cash though to plug these?
No.
Or should we?
No.
If the school needs to, they're going to cut a teacher, should we just?
One of the temptations there is that's just kicking it down the road. And that's one of the hard things, is in the moment you've addressed it, but then that becomes next year maybe 2 people. If the policies allow for an extraordinary circumstance, then the policies that were adopted should really be that roadmap. There are towns that have gotten into significant issues by trying to back end balancing the budget with free cash, and your own policy says that you shouldn't do that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Because we're ready to kind of wrap this up. I'll ask one more question if you don't. So dealing with the board, what's a successful relationship look like between the town manager and the select board?
I think one of the, like a successful relationship would be that we all have open communication, that I can pick up the phone, talk to any of you can do the same, can come in to the office. You all have different schedules, you all have different amounts of availability. I could see an example as far as that in scheduling these interviews, trying to get everyone's schedules to match up. And I view it that I'm the most flexible. If there's different ways that would be effective for you, I can make myself more available. And ideally, I'd be sitting down on a regular weekly, bi-weekly basis just to talk about priorities that each of you may feel is important, to understand maybe what even some of the frustrations are. I want to make sure my select board has all the information it has to make decisions. And on some of those, it's also giving heads up, like there could be some issues that you need to be mindful of because this potentially could become an issue that we need to deal with. Communication is a two-way street. I'd want as much feedback and communication from each one of you as well. I don't know what your preferred style is. It may be, a call on the way into work, it may be a text message, it may be stopping by at lunch, or stopping before or even after a meeting. But that's where, especially with 5 members, there's always the potential 1 or 2 are left out. And that's what I want to make sure doesn't happen. That's the one thing that at least is nice in Upton. 3 people, pretty much I can get in touch with anytime. 5, that takes commitment on both sides to make sure that we can have that open and honest conversation and find what each other's preferred communication style is.
So, Joe, anybody else?
Yeah, I want to do my HR question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
All right, how familiar are you with HR? You have an HR background? You mentioned you did hiring, but...
Yep. So throughout my experience, I was a union president when I was in Wayland, dealing with the administration on HR issues, putting employees on performance action plans. When I got to Littleton, one of the hats that I wore was also as HR director, and dealing with, within my first month, harassment complaints and hiring investigators and all that. One of the main things with HR is making sure that you follow proper procedures, you engage Labor Council, make sure that everything is, all the I's are dotted and T's crossed, and treat people respectfully. I've been fortunate in Upton to build a great team of staff. I also went through, at the very same time as Sutton, a police chief search process, and have a great chief. So I've dealt with HR issues not only on the investigation side, looking at benefits. I sit on our insurance advisory committee, and then also on the hiring side. And we also recently completed a classification compensation study, which then was implemented at our special town meeting in November.
Of course, as you know, one of the results of our police chief search has resulted in litigation. And of course, the litigation stems from the fact that 3 members of this board had to determine that the candidate that came through out of the initial search was unfit for the position. And of course, that unfitness was primarily based upon the fact that the Patrolmen and Sergeants Association unanimously voted no confidence against the individual's promotion. I would argue the reason why we ended up in that position was because, on a town-wide level, the town manager essentially ignored the issues that had been allowed to fester for many, many years. And the reason why that occurred is because we did not have a clear, concise HR policy implemented townwide. So, if you were to come in and get this position, how would you address the gap, as it were, in order to prevent us from resulting in future lawsuits?
So I think one of the first things, and this is really on my approach, is taking inventory as far as and reading up what are all the policies and procedures the town has, and trying to identify opportunities. If there's not a comprehensive personnel policy and procedures manual, looking to see first, why not? What are the challenges for getting there? And then second, how do we do that to make sure that there are some form of standards? I think having clear, identifiable expectations of staff is important as far as policy and procedures management. One, so they know what they're responsible for when you're talking about general HR policies, but also board members and the public. The other thing is that having I have a extremely open door policy. Staff are always welcome to come in, talk about things. I go out and reach out to them, see how things are going. Part of things, if there's long-standing issues, people know about them one way or the other. No town hides secrets. They're always being talked about. There's always some sort of relationship that someone knows of. And being a good listener and also I'd like to think approachable, I want to be able to find a way to make sure that people can work in a safe and respectful environment. And, there can be long-standing issues that unfortunately fester that then lead to those situations. But town manager, in my opinion, town manager as well as the board should not be caught by surprise by those things. You're on the street, you're sure gonna hear things. Sometimes this position can be a little isolated because, well, they don't want to rock the boat. But the end result is that we're all part of the same team, and making sure that we have the resources, the policies, the procedures, the knowing that you have a staff person you can talk to even if it's confidential in nature. Having a person that you can raise these issues with is extremely important. And I understand HR is split between school and the town, but finding ways of making staff more available for sort of drop-ins is also important.
And of course, supporting the HR director as well.
A quick question, follow up on that really quick. So currently, let's say like you have a complaint, right? So what is your time frame for follow up and resolve?
So depending on the complaint, some of them are immediate. But that's where it's some of it, like, we'll get complaints about that really it ends up being, benefit related or not a complaint against another person. But I've unfortunately had the experience where when there is a conflict between one staff person and the other, immediate action is needed. Consultation with Labor Council is also needed. And it doesn't mean that you're engaging town council. It just says, hey, this is going up. I'm giving you a heads up because this could go sideways. And I've unfortunately seen things that escalated very quickly where staff people did not take the guidance from HR or the assistant town administrator at this time and took actions into their own hands and made it worse. So getting out in front, not letting things fester, and letting people know that the ones especially that maybe are coming forward with a complaint, that they are being heard to, that things also take time. and to make sure that they know they can come in, they can talk at any time. That's the main thing, because if you basically just hear them and then you don't follow up with them, they're going to assume that it's being brushed under the rug, and then that can cause other problems as well.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, so that concludes this portion of the interview. At this time, Joe, you have an opportunity for a closing statement to the board.
Okay. Again, I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with all of you. This is really a unique opportunity for me. Sutton had a unique influence on my childhood and also growing up. It helped guide my my course into municipal government, and I would probably be, if I could have convinced my father to sell our house in Sutton, I'd probably be living here. But you know, life takes different turns, and I'm just over the line into Northbridge. But there's a lot of things that Sutton is faced with that I think I have the experience, education, and somewhat the historical perspective to help the select board and other boards, staff sort of achieve the goals that the town would like to see. So,
Joe, thank you. We appreciate you taking the time coming out to Sutton this evening. And as you're aware, the board's doing interviews tonight. They'll be deliberating on Wednesday. You will hear back from Julie and myself as to the results of those deliberations. So again, thank you for coming out.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
have a good night.
Cheers.
So, Mr. Chair, that concludes the interview stage.
Very good.
Process, and now it's for the board for a deliberation stage.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to quickly just make some, my own set of thank yous. I want to thank you, thanks to the community for coming out and supporting our process here tonight. I do want to, as you did earlier, John, thank the screening committee for the work that they did in providing excellent candidates to us. And so thanks to you, John, and Julie for coming out and helping us out tonight. You know, as you've been mentioning, we'll meet again at 6 o'clock on Wednesday evening to talk about where we go from here. Pick a candidate.
So if I may, when you come in, I want to thank the three candidates. They're putting themselves out, you know, being in a public view, especially holding jobs in other communities. So as you go through your deliberations, we always ask that you stick to the positive characteristics that you want to discuss and compare based on the positive characteristics, because these are public sessions, you know. So if we ask you to, you know, keep that in mind as you do your deliberations come Wednesday night.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that. The agenda says discussion. I don't know if there's really anything left to discuss, but other than that, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
That's a motion and a second and a second, and now I guess I'll take a roll call.
Jesse LaManica.
Jonathan Harrison, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
Norman Shopping, aye.
David Hall, aye.